Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the fascinating world of medieval kings and their nightly struggles, specifically, their battle with sleeplessness. It's not a topic you might expect, right? After all, when we think of kings, we picture them lounging in royal beds, surrounded by luxury, fine tapestries, and servants attending to their every need. But here's the twist. It turns out that medieval kings, despite their lavish surroundings, often had a difficult time getting the sleep they so desperately needed. Whether it was the pressure of ruling vast empires, personal fears, or physical ailments, sleep was often elusive for these men. Imagine this. You're a king in medieval Europe, and after a long day of ruling, negotiating, or fighting in wars, you retire to your chambers, hoping for some rest. But instead, your mind races. What if an uprising breaks out during the night? What if someone tries to poison you? Is your throne secure? The weight of responsibility and the constant threat of betrayal meant that sleep wasn't just a simple, peaceful affair. For these rulers, the pursuit of a good night's sleep often came with a hefty price. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I always love hearing from all of you. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'll be imagining all of us, from every corner of the world, on this fascinating journey together. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Medieval kings had to endure a long list of reasons that kept them tossing and turning at night. But interestingly, they didn't just lie there suffering. No, many had their own unique ways of dealing with sleeplessness. These methods ranged from prayer and meditation to potions and peculiar rituals. Imagine the scene. A king, in the midst of a sleepless night, sipping on a warm concoction made from herbs or perhaps sitting in front of a flickering candle, deep in thought, trying to calm his mind. It wasn't just about finding sleep, it was about surviving the night to rule another day. As we explore the ways medieval kings coped with their restless nights, let's start with one of their most effective methods: prayer and divine intervention. In an age where faith ruled nearly every aspect of life, kings often turned to their religious beliefs to help them sleep. You could imagine them kneeling beside their massive four-poster bed, surrounded by velvet curtains and flickering candles, reciting prayers or reading sacred texts. This was no ordinary bedtime reading. These were prayers meant to protect them, to grant them peace, and to ensure that they would wake up safe and sound to continue their reign the next day. But these prayers were often not just about the personal well-being of the king, they were about the welfare of the kingdom itself. Kings saw themselves as God's chosen representatives on earth, so it was their duty to stay healthy, alert, and wise. If sleep eluded them, it was seen as a bad omen, perhaps a sign that the gods were angry or displeased. The prayers were a form of spiritual armor, a way of pleading for divine favor and protection. However, just because the king said his prayers didn't mean sleep would come easily. Often, despite their devotion, they'd still spend long hours staring at the ceiling, mind racing with the worries of the kingdom. Historians still debate whether medieval kings truly believed that their divine prayers could help them sleep, or if they were simply using these rituals to find comfort in a world filled with uncertainty. Some suggest that the repeated prayers were more about offering emotional comfort and a sense of control over an otherwise uncontrollable situation. Regardless of the exact motivation, one thing is clear: prayer was an essential tool in the nightly struggle against insomnia. On top of prayer, many kings had personal physicians, whose sole job was to keep the monarch in good health, and, in some cases, to help them sleep. These doctors were often armed with various herbs, potions, and tonics that were believed to induce sleep, or, at the very least, relax the mind. These remedies were far from the scientifically proven sleep aids we have today, but they often worked in a way. Kings were known to take mixtures of lavender, chamomile, and valerian root, herbs that have long been used for their calming properties. And if that wasn't enough, they might be offered a warm cup of mead or wine, anything to help them relax after a long day of ruling. While prayer and herbal remedies were staples of a medieval king's attempt to sleep, it wasn't all about mystical or medicinal solutions. In fact, another common approach to sleep, especially in the context of those sleepless nights, was physical exhaustion. After all, running a kingdom is no easy task. Medieval kings were expected to make decisions on everything from military strategy to diplomacy, all while managing the complexities of court life. But perhaps most physically draining of all was their penchant for hunting. Imagine this: the king, draped in furs and intricate armor, riding through the thick forests at dawn, chasing after wild boar or stag. The rush of the hunt, the adrenaline of the chase, and the satisfaction of a successful kill. This was no mere sport. It was often seen as a necessary outlet for the king's boundless energy. By the time night fell and the king returned to his castle, he was more than ready for rest. But here's where things get interesting. Despite this exhaustion, many kings still struggled with sleeplessness. Historians still argue whether hunting truly helped with sleep, or if it created a cycle of exhaustion and anxiety. Some claim that it was simply an outlet for physical exertion, while others believe that the rush of adrenaline may have made it even harder for the king to unwind. Regardless, the hunt played a major role in the routine of kings who, after a long day of royal duties, would often return to their chambers with aching muscles, hoping that sleep would find them. Beyond physical exhaustion, there were also the practicalities of their beds. Medieval kings were known for having very luxurious, intricate sleeping arrangements. Picture a giant bed, draped in elaborate tapestries with silk sheets and fluffy pillows. You'd think that with all that luxury, the king would have no trouble drifting off. But instead, these ornate beds sometimes contributed to their restlessness. Too much luxury, it seemed, didn't always equate to a peaceful night's sleep. The bed, often too soft, would sink beneath their weight, leaving them feeling uncomfortable and, in some cases, even causing back pain. This wasn't the only discomfort the king had to contend with during bedtime. The heavy, stuffed mattresses were prone to attracting pests, bedbugs, fleas, and lice were common nuisances. Despite having a staff of servants who worked tirelessly to keep the royal chambers clean, the king could still find himself tossing and turning. Disturbed by these tiny creatures, you might think the king would have simply demanded better conditions. But medieval standards of hygiene were vastly different from what we're accustomed to today. Sometimes, the battle for sleep was fought not only in the mind, but in the very bed itself. Despite the physical exertion of the hunt and the plush comforts of their beds, medieval kings often found that sleep was elusive due to the burdens of their crown. The weight of leadership, responsibility, and constant decision-making could take a toll on the mind, keeping the king awake long after the moon rose high in the night sky. This mental strain was a real issue for many rulers, especially those in constant fear of rebellion or threats to their reign. For example, King Richard II of England, a monarch who ruled in the late 14th century, was famously plagued by sleepless nights. As the weight of political instability loomed over his reign, Richard's insomnia only worsened. Historians still argue whether his restless nights were due to paranoia, poor health, or the relentless stress of his monarchy. But one thing was clear: his inability to rest deeply likely contributed to his later decision-making failures. The stress of worrying about assassination plots, uprisings, or political maneuvers left him lying awake in his lavish bed, staring at the ceiling and contemplating the next move. It wasn't just the threat of rebellion that kept a king up at night, though their position also demanded that they be constantly vigilant about court conspiracies. Imagine having the fate of an entire kingdom resting on your decisions, with nobles, advisors, and family members all vying for your attention. The paranoia of not knowing whom to trust was another factor that eroded a king's ability to sleep peacefully. Some kings even went so far as to keep late-night meetings with their most trusted advisors, discussing matters of state under the cover of darkness. While this may have given them a sense of control, it often meant that their sleep was cut short. Even the most powerful kings weren't immune to the restless turmoil of the mind. King Charles VI of France, known as Charles the Mad, suffered from extreme bouts of madness, which some scholars speculate could have been linked to his sleeplessness. His condition manifested in strange episodes where he would believe he was made of glass and would refuse to let anyone touch him. Could it have been a combination of his anxiety, stress, and lack of sleep that contributed to his unraveling mental state? Historians are still unsure, but it's clear that insomnia, along with the pressures of kingship, played a part in his mental decline. In contrast to the anxiety-driven sleepless nights, some kings turned to indulgence as a form of escape. As we've seen, luxury and comfort were important to medieval kings, but their indulgence went beyond lavish beds and silk sheets. Many kings were known to engage in late-night feasts, where food and drink flowed freely, in an attempt to unwind after long, taxing days. But this indulgence wasn't just about eating, it was often about drinking. The medieval kings of Europe had access to some of the finest wines, olives, and meads, and they often relied on these alcoholic beverages to relax their minds and drift off to sleep. Unfortunately, the after effects of these late-night revelries often led to a restless night, with the alcohol wearing off and leaving the king to wrestle with the consequences of his indulgence. But it wasn't always alcohol that helped the king relax. In some cases, the stress of kingship required something a little more hands-on. Some rulers would turn to an ancient and soothing practice: massage. Think of it as a kind of royal spa treatment. Courtiers and physicians would apply oils, sometimes infused with soothing herbs, to the body to relieve stress and induce relaxation. In the case of King Louis XIV of France, he was particularly fond of having regular massages to ease his tension. But while it may have helped with physical relaxation, did it truly solve the deeper issues of anxiety and sleeplessness that plagued these rulers? Perhaps not entirely, but it certainly made the kings feel a little better, at least for a time. As we dive deeper into the nocturnal struggles of medieval kings, let's take a closer look at how some of them turned to more extraordinary methods to combat their sleeplessness. For some rulers, it wasn't enough to rely on the comforts of a feather-stuffed mattress or a late-night goblet of wine. No, for the truly desperate, there were remedies that ranged from the bizarre to the somewhat effective. These methods, while strange, were often rooted in the beliefs of the time. Take, for example, the use of herbs and potions. In the medieval period, there was a widespread belief that certain herbs and concoctions could not only soothe the body but could also calm the mind. Kings, accustomed to living on the edge of paranoia, often had access to the best healers and apothecaries of the time. One such remedy, known as bedchamber herbs, included calming concoctions made from lavender, valerian, and even the intoxicating effects of opium. Monarchs would often have these herbal mixtures prepared for them before bed, hoping that the soothing properties would lull them into a peaceful, uninterrupted slumber. However, the success of these remedies was far from guaranteed. While some kings might have enjoyed a good night's sleep, others were left with only a slightly groggy morning after. In addition to these remedies, kings often sought out the advice of astrologers and mystics, who held a great deal of influence during this era. If a king was suffering from restless nights, the mystic would be consulted to determine if any planetary alignments or lunar phases were affecting the ruler's ability to sleep. Ancient beliefs held that certain celestial configurations could either enhance or disrupt the natural flow of energy, and it was thought that these disturbances could be responsible for a king's insomnia. If an astrologer believed that an unfavorable star alignment was to blame, the king might have been advised to wait until the planets shifted, or even to take part in rituals intended to appease the stars. While these methods may sound far-fetched by today's standards, they played a significant role in how medieval kings tried to alleviate their nightly struggles. But let's not forget about the power of distraction. Sometimes, the kings found solace in seeking out distractions from their daily duties. A king with a troubled mind might turn to his court musicians, dancers, or poets to entertain him through the long hours of the night. Music, with its ability to soothe and calm, was often seen as a balm for the soul. Medieval courts were known for their grand feasts and performances, and it was not uncommon for the royal household to spend late hours in a sort of cultural immersion, using music and performance to relieve tension. Whether it was a ballad about love, a dance to the rhythm of a drum, or the delicate strumming of a lute, these performances provided a temporary escape from the weight of leadership and allowed the king to unwind before sleep. However, for some kings, the issue wasn't simply about finding ways to relax. It was about the fear of what they might face upon waking. Dreams, particularly nightmares, were believed to be prophetic and laden with meaning. If a king woke in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat from a troubling dream, it was a sign that something ominous was ahead. Kings of the medieval era took these dreams seriously, as they often interpreted them as omens or messages from the gods. If a king experienced such a nightmare, he might summon his advisors for interpretation, or even consult a seer to gain insight into the possible future. These dreams, while perhaps a result of stress or anxiety, were considered powerful enough to influence decisions made during the day. Historians still argue whether medieval kings truly believed that their dreams were prophetic, or whether the interpretation of these dreams was simply a convenient excuse for them to act on their anxieties. Some believe that dreams played a major role in their decision-making, while others suggest that the kings used their dreams as a form of mental validation. Whatever the case, the impact of these nocturnal experiences cannot be underestimated in understanding how deeply the rulers of the time struggled with their nightly thoughts. And let's not forget the more unconventional, albeit still somewhat common, sleeping aids of the time. Medieval kings, much like us, had their quirks when it came to finding the perfect sleeping environment. One king, believed to have suffered from severe insomnia, reportedly surrounded himself with small animals during the night. The idea behind this peculiar practice was that the soothing sounds of creatures, such as birds or small mammals, would help calm the king's mind. Whether it worked or not is still up for debate, but the king's attempt to turn his bedroom into a sanctuary of sorts highlights just how far some rulers were willing to go for a peaceful night's sleep. As we continue to explore the unusual practices medieval kings used to combat sleepless nights, we cannot overlook the significance of royal rituals that blended superstition, religion, and royal prerogative. These rituals were meant to ensure the king's peace of mind, as well as the safety and prosperity of the kingdom itself. Sleep was often seen as a vulnerable state, a time when a king could be at his most susceptible to both external threats and internal insecurities. It's no surprise, then, that many medieval kings turned to ceremonial acts before bed, hoping that these would provide them with divine protection. One such ritual involved nightly prayers and invocations to the king's patron saints or deities. Monarchs, often surrounded by advisors and religious officials, would seek guidance or protection through these prayers. These prayers, sometimes long and elaborate, were designed to put the king's mind at ease and shield him from potential nightmares or disturbances. The belief was that by calling upon the gods, the king could create a sense of spiritual protection, ensuring that his dreams would not be haunted by the threat of assassination or betrayal. While the prayers might not have physically cured insomnia, they certainly provided a sense of comfort, as they reminded the king that he was never truly alone in his struggles. In some royal courts, these prayers and rituals were elaborately formalized, with a dedicated team of priests or clergy assigned to perform them nightly. These individuals would often recite prayers and light sacred candles, filling the air with an aroma of incense that would further soothe the king's troubled mind. This holy atmosphere was meant to create a boundary between the king's earthly struggles and the divine world he hoped to enter through sleep. In a way, these rituals acted as both an emotional and psychological safeguard, providing the ruler with a semblance of control over his most vulnerable state. However, not every king relied on religious or spiritual practices. Some kings, rather than seeking solace in prayer or divine intervention, turned to the practicalities of their surroundings. The medieval castle or palace, with its stone walls and towering structures, could be a cold and foreboding place, especially at night. The physical environment, with its harsh stone floors and drafty hallways, had a way of amplifying the isolation that a king might already feel. In these cases, kings often sought comfort in the simple, tactile nature of their surroundings. The choice of bedding, for example, was an important one. Some kings preferred softer mattresses made from layers of fine linens or wool, while others opted for harder, firmer beds to maintain a sense of control. These beds weren't just about comfort. They were about ritual and symbolism. In many cases, the bed was a symbol of the king's power and authority. It wasn't unusual for medieval kings to sleep in a grand, ceremonial bed surrounded by ornate canopies and drapes. The larger and more opulent the bed, the greater the king's perceived power. This was no mere sleeping arrangement. It was a reflection of the king's status. In fact, kings often used their beds as a stage upon which they could display their wealth and influence. This practice could, in turn, affect their ability to sleep. For some rulers, the pressure of maintaining a certain image while in bed might have contributed to their insomnia. Historians still debate whether the royal bed was truly a symbol of the king's power or merely a result of societal expectations. Some argue that the need to appear powerful even while sleeping was a reflection of the king's heightened sense of vulnerability, while others believe that the elaborate beds were simply an extension of royal vanity. Whatever the case, the link between the king's bed and his sense of self-worth is clear. For many, sleep was about much more than rest. It was about reinforcing authority. The connection between physical comfort and mental peace was especially evident when kings found themselves suffering from sleep disturbances caused by their anxieties. In such cases, rulers might turn to their trusted physicians for help. Medieval doctors, though limited by their understanding of the body, often prescribed herbal remedies or even massaging techniques to help induce sleep. The royal court physician's role wasn't just about curing ailments. It was about maintaining the king's mental and emotional stability, allowing him to perform his duties without the constant distraction of sleepless nights. Sometimes, the remedy was as simple as a warm drink before bed. Various concoctions of honey, milk, or even special teas were brewed to calm the mind. These drinks, while not necessarily effective in the modern sense, provided the king with the comfort of a familiar, soothing routine. In addition, these soothing drinks were often imbued with symbolic meaning. Kings may have believed that drinking such concoctions before bed would allow them to maintain a connection to their ancestors or to the gods themselves. Interestingly, historians still argue over the effectiveness of these remedies. Some believe that these warm, comforting drinks had a genuine therapeutic effect, while others argue that they were little more than placebo treatments. Regardless, the act of consuming a ritualistic drink before bed helped create a sense of control in an otherwise uncontrollable environment. As the king continued to grapple with the challenges of his sleepless nights, some monarchs turned to their dreams as a source of guidance and insight. In a time when the line between the mystical and the practical was often blurred, Dreams were considered powerful tools for decision-making. Kings and rulers believed that their dreams could provide them with visions from the divine or messages about the future. This belief in the prophetic power of dreams wasn't limited to kings alone. Many medieval people saw dreams as omens, messages from the gods, or the dead, guiding them in their daily lives. In royal courts, the interpretation of dreams became a highly respected skill. Court astrologers, mystics, and even the king's advisors were often asked to analyze and interpret the ruler's dreams. These dream interpreters were tasked with deciphering complex symbols, understanding the messages, and offering advice on how to act accordingly. For a medieval king, this could mean the difference between making a wise decision and one that would lead to disaster. A king might wake from a disturbing dream, and rather than dismissing it, he might immediately summon his advisors to interpret the meaning. They would often analyze the context of the dream, considering the state of the kingdom, the king's personal health, or even astrological factors, before offering their interpretation. The belief in the power of dreams was so strong that kings often kept detailed journals of their nightly visions. These dream diaries, some of which have survived to this day, were not just records of sleep disturbances, but also repositories of prophetic advice. Some kings even took the drastic step of consulting these journals before making major decisions, such as going to war or changing laws. The king's connection to his dreams was deeply personal, and it was believed that the guidance they provided was a form of divine favor, helping the monarch navigate the complex and dangerous world of medieval politics. But not all kings were content with simply interpreting their dreams. Some actively sought out ways to influence their dreams, hoping to shape them into visions of strength, victory, and prosperity. In these cases, the use of dream-inducing rituals became common. The ritual process varied depending on the king's cultural background, but it often involved the use of herbs, incantations, or sacred objects. Kings would sometimes sleep with specific talismans under their pillows, hoping to attract the right kind of dreams. These objects were believed to bring good fortune or divine protection, providing the king with the mental clarity he needed to govern effectively. Historians still debate the role of dreams in medieval rulership. Some suggest that the kings who sought guidance from their dreams were merely superstitious, while others argue that the practice reflected a deep psychological need to find comfort in the midst of overwhelming responsibility. Dreams were a form of psychological release for these rulers, a way to cope with the pressure of governing vast territories and keeping their people content. Even if they didn't fully believe in the prophetic power of their dreams, the very act of seeking out guidance provided a sense of control over an otherwise chaotic world. Interestingly, there are examples of kings who experienced nightmares or disturbing dreams that haunted them long after they woke up. These unsettling dreams could affect a ruler's mood and decision-making, sometimes making them more paranoid or even paranoid about their safety. In these cases, the fear of a bad omen or a curse could lead to drastic measures. A king might order the execution of someone he believed to be responsible for his nightmares, or he might make irrational decisions based on the fear that his dreams were an omen of impending doom. Some kings, however, turned their nightmares into sources of power. In these instances, they saw their dark dreams as messages from the gods that signified an impending battle or conflict that needed to be faced head-on. The most famous example of this is the legendary King Charlemagne, who reportedly experienced vivid dreams in which he was visited by angels, warning him of threats to his empire. Rather than dismissing these dreams, Charlemagne is said to have used them as sources of inspiration, rallying his army and preparing for battle as though the fate of his kingdom was sealed by divine will. These fascinating glimpses into the medieval king's relationship with his dreams reveal a unique intersection of psychological vulnerability and divine intervention. Kings, surrounded by immense pressure and responsibility, sought comfort, guidance, and reassurance through rituals that span the realms of the mystical and the practical. By turning to dreams, whether for inspiration or warning, they navigated their sleepless nights with a sense of purpose that extended beyond mere survival. As the sleepless kings wrestled with dreams, omens, and rituals, some turned to another source of comfort and solace: music. In the medieval courts, music was not just a form of entertainment, it was a healing art, a way to soothe the troubled mind and lift the spirits of both the king and his court. Imagine it now, the soft strains of a lute or the deep tones of a harp filling the grand hall, their melodies weaving through the corridors, reaching the king's ears. Music had a deep connection to the soul and was believed to have the power to restore balance, calm nerves, and help bring rest to even the most troubled minds. For medieval kings, the therapeutic effects of music were not to be underestimated. It wasn't uncommon for rulers to summon skilled musicians or composers to perform during late-night hours when insomnia struck. These performances were seen as a form of psychological treatment, almost like a lullaby for the royal soul. Music could help quiet the king's racing thoughts, giving him the mental peace needed to focus on the next day's challenges. Whether played during feasts or as part of private royal rituals, the sounds of instruments like the lute, harp, or flute created a sacred space where the king could temporarily escape the weight of his crown. Historians still debate the full impact of music on medieval kings, but one thing is clear. The connection between music and relaxation was deeply ingrained in the royal psyche. Some kings even commissioned specific compositions designed to lull them into a restful state. These compositions were often intricate, with specific rhythms and harmonies thought to invoke calmness. And it wasn't just the music itself, it was the environment in which it was played. The royal chambers, often dimly lit and rich in velvet and tapestry, were transformed into sanctuaries where music could work its magic. But not all music was intended for peaceful relaxation. Some kings used music as a tool for motivation, energizing themselves and their troops for battle or significant events. The sounds of trumpets and drums were as much a part of the pre-battle rituals as the strategies discussed in the war room. These energetic, triumphant sounds helped rally the troops, pumping them full of adrenaline and preparing them for the physical and emotional challenges of combat. For the king, hearing the rousing call of the trumpet could act as a reminder of his strength and divine mandate to lead, bringing clarity and focus to an otherwise sleepless night. Interestingly, the practice of playing music during moments of stress or tension wasn't limited to kings. In some royal courts, the power of music was so revered that entire orchestras would perform in the presence of the monarch. These orchestras were composed of musicians skilled in various instruments, each contributing to the harmonious soundscape that filled the royal halls. The music was thought to calm not just the king, but also the entire court, providing a collective sense of peace and stability in times of uncertainty. The act of listening to music, in this sense, became a shared experience that bonded the king and his subjects, further reinforcing the power of music as a means of psychological healing. But as much as music could soothe the soul, there were moments when the king's sleepless nights could not be cured by even the most enchanting melodies. In these instances, some kings turned to more extreme measures. In desperate efforts to find peace, certain monarchs employed sleep-inducing concoctions, often herbal in nature, to force their bodies into slumber. These potions, made from ingredients like poppies, lavender, or valerian, were believed to have strong sedative effects. The royal apothecaries would prepare these potions, which the king would consume in the hopes of overcoming his insomnia. However, these substances came with their own set of risks. While they might have helped induce sleep in the short term, their long-term effects were not well understood. Some kings became reliant on these potions, using them night after night, only to find that the quality of their sleep diminished over time. And though they might have found some relief, the sleep they experienced wasn't always restorative. It was more of a forced, unnatural state. This led to further challenges, as the kings found themselves facing a growing cycle of dependency, needing more and more of the potion to achieve the same effect. Historians still argue over the effectiveness and safety of these sleep remedies. Some suggest that the reliance on these substances was a sign of the desperation many rulers felt during their sleepless nights, while others believe that they were simply a reflection of the medical knowledge of the time. It's also worth noting that these sleep potions weren't only used by kings. Many people in medieval society, from commoners to nobles, sought out similar remedies to cope with their own sleeplessness. The difference, of course, was that the king had the resources to procure the finest and most potent versions of these potions, often prepared by the royal apothecaries. While some kings relied on music and potions to battle their sleepless nights, others found solace in more spiritual means. For those who had a strong belief in the divine, prayer and meditation became powerful tools for coping with insomnia. Prayers, both personal and formal, were recited to invoke the help of gods, saints, or celestial beings. The act of prayer was believed to create a sense of peace and connection to something greater than oneself, allowing the king to surrender his anxieties and fears. In many cases, the royal court would participate in these prayers, offering collective support to the king during his struggles with sleeplessness. This connection to spirituality was seen as a vital part of the healing process. The belief that divine intervention could bring rest and comfort made prayer an essential ritual in the royal household. Even though it might not have always led to immediate sleep, the process of reaching out to the divine for assistance helped the king feel less alone in his struggles. Whether through the calming strains of music, the temporary relief of sleep potions, or the power of prayer, kings throughout history sought various methods to navigate their sleepless nights, often turning to these practices to restore their peace of mind and mental clarity. As the sleeplessness continued, Some medieval kings turned to their closest advisors for support: counselors, physicians, and philosophers, while the royal court was filled with aides to manage every aspect of the king's life. It was the physicians who played a key role in addressing the nightly struggles. Kings, despite their grand titles, were not immune to the anxieties and troubles that plagued even the most common of people. It wasn't just the weight of governance or war that kept them awake. Their health, too, was a matter of paramount concern. The fear of death, the fear of being overwhelmed by their duties, and the uncertainty of their legacy contributed to a sleepless mind. Medieval medicine was far from the advanced science we know today, but it had its own remedies, some of which were surprisingly effective, and others, well, not so much. Physicians in royal courts often administered treatments that ranged from herbal concoctions to bloodletting, with the intent of soothing the mind and body. Kings, in their desperate state, would often try anything to get relief, even if it meant enduring the discomfort of treatments that could be considered extreme by modern standards. Herbs like valerian, lavender, and chamomile were common in the royal apothecaries. These herbs were believed to have calming properties and were used to treat insomnia. However, the doses and preparation methods often varied, leading to uncertain results. Some physicians recommended creating tinctures that were steeped for days, while others preferred fresh herbs applied directly to the skin. The process of making these remedies was time-consuming, but when a king's sleep was on the line, it was all worth it. Beyond the herbs, the royal physicians also offered advice on lifestyle changes. Kings, who were often accustomed to long nights of decision-making and constant worry, were encouraged to adopt routines that could promote better sleep. These might include walking before bed, eating lighter meals, and reducing the consumption of wine, advice that, though simple, was seen as revolutionary at the time. The idea was to help the body relax, to free the king from the burdens of his daily life, and to encourage restfulness. Some scholars believe that these lifestyle modifications were among the most helpful changes a king could make in terms of sleep quality. Historians still debate whether the kings truly understood the root causes of their insomnia. Some argue that it was merely a result of the stresses of power and governance, while others suggest there was a more physiological or psychological component at play. Perhaps it was a combination of both, with the mind overwhelmed by the weight of a kingdom and the body struggling to keep up. What remains clear is that the royal physicians played a pivotal role in the quest to help their kings achieve peace of mind, even if the results weren't always immediate. Yet not all kings were inclined to accept the gentle advice of their physicians. Some, in their desperation, sought the aid of the more mystical aspects of medieval life. The use of astrology, divination, and other forms of spiritual guidance was common during the medieval period. Kings, especially those who were deeply religious or superstitious, turned to astrologers and seers to predict their fate and ease their minds. Astrology, in particular, was believed to hold the key to understanding the king's health and future. The alignment of the stars, it was said, could offer insights into the king's physical and mental state. Astrologers would read the king's birth chart, analyzing the positions of the planets at the time of his birth and at key moments throughout his life. This was thought to offer valuable information on the king's strengths, weaknesses, and even his susceptibility to insomnia. If a king's horoscope indicated that the stars were aligned unfavorably, astrologers might prescribe certain rituals or talismans to counteract the negative effects. These could include wearing certain gemstones, praying at specific times, or performing special rituals. The belief in astrology was so strong that some kings would not make major decisions without consulting their astrologers first. Of course, not everyone in the royal court was convinced by the idea of astrology. Some viewed it as little more than superstition, while others believed it to be a serious science. But for those who found comfort in it, the mystical interpretations of the stars provided a sense of control over the uncontrollable. They could look to the heavens and, if the stars were right, believe that peace and restful sleep were within their reach. While astrology and remedies like herbs and lifestyle changes were common, some kings, feeling especially vulnerable during their sleepless nights, turned to more drastic measures. These could include invoking divine intervention through prayer or appealing to the saints for a miracle. Some kings would hold religious vigils, where monks or priests would offer prayers for the king's health and peace of mind. These prayers weren't just for a good night's sleep. They were meant to grant the king spiritual protection and guidance, ensuring that he would remain strong, both physically and mentally, to lead his people. Historians still debate the effectiveness of these spiritual interventions. Some argue that prayer and divine intervention offered more psychological comfort than physical relief, while others suggest that these practices were deeply ingrained in the medieval worldview. and so the belief in their power was enough to bring about some sense of peace. Either way, kings who turned to the divine were often comforted by the thought that they weren't alone in their struggles with sleeplessness. So, whether it was the gentle strains of music, the soothing effects of herbal remedies, the advice of trusted physicians, the mystical guidance of astrologers, or the power of prayer, medieval kings found themselves in a constant battle with their sleepless nights. But through it all, they sought comfort in whatever form they could find, whatever helped them find a moment of peace amidst the chaos of their reigns. As the kings and their counselors continued to battle sleepless nights, many sought solace in the more intellectual practices of the time. In a world dominated by wars, court politics, and the ever-present pressure of royal duties, it's no surprise that kings turned to the arts of the mind for comfort. One particularly popular form of intellectual relaxation was the art of reading and writing. It might seem like an odd choice for something to help induce sleep, but in the medieval world, reading wasn't just for learning, it was a way to escape. Books were considered treasures, often carefully illuminated by monks and scribes, with intricate designs and beautiful script. The stories within them were filled with heroes, gods, and epic tales, but they were also deeply spiritual, filled with meditations on life, death, and the divine. Kings, despite their power, had a lot to reflect on. The constant threat of assassination, the weight of the crown, and the responsibility for their people could wear down even the strongest of rulers. To retreat into a well-bound manuscript offered them a form of peace, allowing them to momentarily forget their anxieties and lose themselves in the written word. Some kings, especially those who ruled during the height of the medieval period, were patrons of the arts. Their courts were filled with poets, philosophers, and scholars, all tasked with writing works that would both entertain and educate. The kings often spent their sleepless nights reading these texts, finding comfort in the stories that stretched across distant lands and times. The act of reading became, for many, a form of mental escapism that allowed them to temporarily step outside their role as rulers and just be, if only for a few hours. Historians still debate the role of literature in medieval kings' lives. Some suggest that it was a vital tool for managing the stresses of leadership, allowing kings to process their feelings and reflections. Others argue that the pursuit of knowledge was less about relaxation and more about the king's need to understand the world around him in order to rule more effectively. Either way, it's clear that literature played an important role in helping these rulers cope with their sleepless nights. Kings could immerse themselves in texts that offered both solace and the opportunity for intellectual growth, which may have been just what they needed to maintain a semblance of peace amidst the turmoil of their reigns. But not all kings sought mental escape through reading. Some turned to art, specifically the visual arts, as a form of relaxation. Illuminated manuscripts, as we've already mentioned, were one example of this. But the art of the time wasn't limited to books. Kings would commission elaborate paintings, tapestries, and sculptures to decorate their palaces, not just for the sake of grandeur, but also as a means of creating an environment that would soothe their minds. These works of art often depicted religious themes, allegorical stories, and scenes of nature, all designed to promote tranquility and contemplation. Medieval art, with its bold colors and symbolic representations, was a way for kings to connect with higher ideals. The process of commissioning and appreciating these works offered the king a chance to step outside his everyday worries and reflect on beauty, faith, and life's deeper meanings. For many, it was a form of meditation, an opportunity to focus on something other than the pressing matters of the kingdom. The relationship between kings and their royal artists is a fascinating one. Artists weren't just hired to decorate palaces. They were often seen as important figures within the court. Their work was viewed not just as decoration, but as an expression of the divine, a reflection of the heavenly order. Kings would sometimes spend hours admiring the paintings and sculptures in their courts, finding a sense of peace in the beauty and symbolism that these works provided. Historians still argue about the true function of art in medieval royalty's life. Was it a way to display power, wealth, and divine favor, or was it truly a form of relaxation and reflection for the kings? While some scholars suggest that it was a matter of political strategy, others maintain that it provided a much-needed mental reprieve for these leaders, regardless of the intention behind it. One thing is clear: art played an important role in helping kings cope with their sleepless nights. As we move beyond the intellectual and artistic realms, some kings turned to more personal forms of comfort. Their relationships with their family, particularly their wives and children, often became an important source of emotional support. The role of the queen, though often overshadowed by the king's duties, was significant in offering comfort during these turbulent times. The intimacy of family life, particularly during moments of relaxation or togetherness, offered the king a brief respite from the pressures of his reign. Historians still debate the role of queens and royal consorts in the emotional lives of medieval kings. Some argue that their primary role was political, marrying into powerful families to strengthen alliances. Others suggest that the emotional and personal support they provided was just as important. Regardless of their role in politics, the queens and consorts were often the king's confidants, offering him a safe space to express his vulnerabilities. Their ability to soothe the king's troubled mind through quiet companionship or shared family moments cannot be underestimated. Kings may have sought their support during sleepless nights, finding in their loved ones the comfort they needed to find a little peace. The relationship between kings and their families is still a subject of historical inquiry. Some scholars focus on the political importance of these unions, while others delve into the emotional impact they had on the kings. But one thing remains certain: kings, just like anyone else, needed emotional support. Their families provided them with the connections and comfort that helped them navigate their sleepless nights. So, whether it was through reading, art, intellectual pursuits, or personal relationships, medieval kings found various ways to cope with the challenges of sleeplessness. They didn't have the luxury of modern sleep aids, but they had their intellects, their arts, and their loved ones to offer them solace. Their struggles with sleepless nights may have been unique, but in many ways, they were not so different from the challenges we face today. As we continue to explore the strategies medieval kings employed to cope with sleeplessness, we now turn our attention to the physical and psychological toll that the stress of ruling could have on these monarchs. Kings were, after all, only human, and the weight of their responsibilities often left them physically drained and mentally exhausted. This was especially true during times of war, rebellion, or political instability, where the demands on their time and energy were relentless. These periods were marked by sleepless nights that could stretch on for weeks, as the kings had to remain vigilant, make difficult decisions, and maintain control over their kingdoms. The physical impact of sleeplessness on medieval kings was a topic that has been touched on by historians, who have noted that sleep deprivation could lead to a host of health issues, including headaches, weakened immune systems, and even hallucinations. A ruler who was constantly awake, either due to the demands of his kingdom or his own worries, could see his mental faculties deteriorate. Chronic fatigue could also make it difficult to maintain a clear mind, which is crucial for making sound decisions. The toll that such sleep deprivation took on the body was real, and it was something that many kings had to deal with on a daily basis. Interestingly, some kings took extreme measures to combat the physical effects of sleeplessness. The use of herbal remedies was common, and these remedies were often made from ingredients that could be found in the royal gardens or imported from distant lands. Herbs like valerian, lavender, and chamomile were frequently used to promote relaxation and induce sleep. Some monarchs would turn to their court physicians, who were often skilled in the art of herbal medicine, to help them find relief from their sleepless nights. However, not all remedies were natural. Kings sometimes sought out alchemists, who were known for concocting strange potions and elixirs designed to calm the mind and help the king rest. Historians still debate the effectiveness of these herbal remedies. Some argue that they were little more than placebo, offering no real relief, while others maintain that they played a vital role in helping kings get a much-needed reprieve from their sleepless nights. While we may never know the full extent of their impact, one thing is clear: medieval kings were not above seeking out help, whether from natural remedies or mystical potions, to combat the physical effects of sleeplessness. Of course, it wasn't just the physical toll of sleeplessness that kings had to contend with. The psychological toll was just as significant, if not more so. The fear of betrayal, assassination, or failure weighed heavily on the minds of medieval monarchs. Many kings lived in constant fear of being overthrown or defeated in battle. This fear could lead to anxiety, paranoia, and, in some cases, full-blown mental breakdowns. For a king to admit that he was struggling with his mental health was unthinkable. Such vulnerability could be seen as a weakness and might be exploited by his enemies. As a result, many kings kept their feelings bottled up, suffering in silence as they struggled to maintain their grip on power. It's no surprise, then, that some kings sought comfort in the spiritual realm. Prayer and religious rituals were an important part of life for medieval monarchs, especially when they were facing personal or political crises. In times of great distress, kings would turn to their faith, seeking solace in the belief that a higher power was watching over them. Monks, priests, and clerics were often called upon to perform blessings, offer prayers, and hold mass for the king's well-being. These religious rituals not only provided comfort, but also served to reinforce the king's connection to the divine, reminding him that his reign was ordained by God. The role of religion in helping kings cope with sleeplessness and stress is still a topic of discussion among scholars. Some argue that the spiritual support provided by the church helped to stabilize monarchs, allowing them to persevere through difficult times. Others suggest that it was more of a psychological crutch, offering reassurance without addressing the root causes of the king's anxiety. Regardless of the interpretation, it is clear that the practice of seeking divine intervention was deeply ingrained in the minds of medieval kings. It gave them a sense of control in an otherwise uncontrollable world. In addition to their religious practices, kings also sought out guidance from their counselors and advisors. Medieval monarchs didn't rule in isolation. They had a network of trusted individuals who helped them navigate the complexities of governance. These advisors often served as sounding boards for the king's worries, providing a measure of comfort and assurance during times of crisis. The relationship between the king and his counselors was one of mutual dependence. The king needed their advice, and they needed the king's patronage and protection. During sleepless nights, these conversations could be a source of relief, allowing the king to unload his fears and find solutions to the problems that plagued his reign. The role of counselors in easing the psychological burden of kings is a fascinating area of study. Some historians believe that these advisors were more than just political allies. They were also informal therapists, offering emotional support and helping kings cope with the stresses of leadership. Others argue that these relationships were more transactional, with counselors providing advice in exchange for power and influence. Either way, it is clear that the bond between kings and their advisors was crucial in helping them navigate the emotional turmoil that often accompanied sleepless nights. As we move forward, it's important to remember that kings were not infallible beings. They were, in many ways, just like the rest of us, vulnerable to stress, anxiety, and sleeplessness. The strategies they employed to cope with these challenges were varied and often unconventional, from intellectual pursuits like reading and art to herbal remedies and religious rituals. But through it all, they persevered. The ability to balance personal well-being with the demands of leadership was a crucial skill for medieval kings, and it's something that remains relevant even today. Now that we've covered some of the mental and physical ways kings attempted to cope with sleepless nights, let's explore the more unusual and creative strategies they used to address their lack of sleep. Medieval kings were nothing if not resourceful when it came to finding ways to get some rest. For some, the answer lay in a curious mix of entertainment, rituals, and even bizarre treatments that were far from conventional. One of the most interesting ways medieval kings tried to combat their sleeplessness was by indulging in creative pursuits during the night. The idea of a king entertaining himself with the arts or intellectual activities might seem out of place in a time of war and political intrigue, but for many monarchs, it was precisely what they needed to calm their racing minds. In fact, during particularly stressful periods, some kings would turn to music, painting, or poetry to find solace in the stillness of the night. Take, for example, King Louis XIV of France. The Sun King, as he was known, had a penchant for creating elaborate, theatrical events during the night. He would often host lavish court performances, including ballet and music, to help him unwind after a long day of ruling. These performances weren't just entertainment. They were part of a carefully constructed persona that reinforced his divine right to rule. For Louis, the rituals of courtly life, complete with music and dance, were a way to escape from the pressures of governing and find some peace before bed. It wasn't about mere diversion, it was about reaffirming his place as the absolute monarch and finding tranquility through the arts. Historians still debate whether Louis XIV's nighttime indulgence in performances truly helped him rest, or if it merely served to distract him from deeper concerns. Some argue that his passion for spectacle was a reflection of his deep anxiety and desire for control, while others suggest that he genuinely found comfort in the artistic expressions of his court. Regardless of the interpretation, it is clear that kings like Louis XIV used creativity and entertainment as a way to manage the toll that sleeplessness took on their health and psyche. Meanwhile, in England, King Henry VIII's relationship with sleep was equally peculiar. Known for his fiery temper and ever-expanding waistline, Henry VIII was also an avid lover of jousting and hunting. While these activities may seem to be more physically demanding than restful, they were actually key to his ability to cope with sleepless nights. Hunting trips, particularly those in the early morning, allowed the king to clear his mind, burn off excess energy, and return to his palace with a sense of accomplishment. These outdoor pursuits offered him a form of escape, one that was both physically and mentally invigorating. Historians still argue whether Henry's late-night hunting excursions were an attempt to stave off feelings of loneliness and anxiety, or if they were simply a reflection of his physical exuberance. Regardless, it is clear that the king's physical exertions played an important role in helping him sleep better. His passion for hunting and jousting, combined with his lavish feasts and frequent interactions with his court, created an environment where restlessness could be soothed by physical activity. For Henry, sleep was often the byproduct of a day well spent, whether it was in the court or the great outdoors. But not all kings turned to entertainment or physical pursuits to battle their sleeplessness. Some sought out more unconventional methods, many of which would seem outlandish by today's standards. One such king was the Byzantine emperor Alexios I Komnenos, who suffered from severe insomnia. Instead of relying on herbal remedies or court performances, Alexios reportedly turned to a peculiar, almost mystical solution. He would hold conversations with his closest advisors and generals late into the night, sometimes talking for hours on end about matters of state. It was believed that the act of engaging in deep conversation about his empire helped to occupy his mind, preventing it from wandering into the realms of anxiety or fear. Historians still debate whether Alexios's late-night discussions were a true remedy for his insomnia, or simply a means of staving off loneliness and isolation. Some argue that his excessive talking during the night served as a coping mechanism for his feelings of insecurity, while others suggest that it was a deliberate strategy to keep his mind sharp and his spirits high. Regardless of the reasons behind it, the emperor's late-night conversations became legendary, providing both a practical and psychological outlet for his sleepless nights. In medieval England, some kings also tried to sleep in very specific conditions. King Edward II, for example, was known to sleep in his armor. This strange habit was said to have been born out of a sense of vulnerability and fear. Edward, who faced constant political strife during his reign, reportedly felt that sleeping in his armor provided him with a sense of protection. Though this practice may seem unusual, it highlights the psychological toll that ruling a kingdom could have on a monarch. The fear of betrayal or assassination was a constant threat for medieval kings, and it was not uncommon for them to sleep in uncomfortable or even restrictive conditions in an attempt to feel secure. Historians still argue about whether Edward II's sleeping habits were a reflection of his paranoia, or whether it was simply a manifestation of his insecurities as a ruler. Some believe that the armor was a symbolic gesture, showing that the king was always ready for battle, while others argue that it was an expression of his deep-seated fear of his enemies. Whatever the case, Edward's habit of sleeping in armor further illustrates the extremes to which kings would go in order to find some form of comfort, however fleeting. In their sleepless nights, as we explore these kings and their strategies for coping with sleeplessness, it becomes clear that no two monarchs dealt with the challenges of ruling in the same way. Whether it was through art, physical exertion, intellectual conversations, or even sleeping in armor, each king developed his own methods for managing the pressures of leadership. And while their methods may seem strange or impractical to us today, they offer fascinating insight into the human side of medieval royalty. In the end, it wasn't just about getting a good night's sleep. It was about finding ways to survive the intense emotional and physical demands of their roles. Now, as we continue our exploration of how medieval kings coped with their sleepless nights, let's focus on an aspect of their lives that might surprise you. Their relationship with sleep was often intertwined with their notions of power, control, and legacy. After all, for a king, sleep wasn't just about rest, it was about asserting authority, making decisions, and ensuring that the kingdom stayed intact while they recharged for the next day's challenges. But despite their seemingly indomitable power, kings were only human, and sometimes their sleep troubles were more than just personal. They were political. Take King Charles V of France. For example, Charles was known for being deeply involved in his kingdom's affairs, often staying awake at night, drafting decrees and responding to political matters. His restlessness wasn't simply due to insomnia, but rather a symptom of his sense of duty. Charles believed that by staying awake and attending to state matters during the night, he was demonstrating his commitment to his role as monarch. This dedication to his kingdom, however, came at a personal cost: his health. Charles struggled with what we might now recognize as stress-related health issues, including anxiety and an inability to relax. Historians still argue whether his insomnia was a direct result of the immense political pressure he faced, or if it was a deeper psychological struggle with his own sense of purpose and identity as a ruler. Interestingly, Charles also sought solace in prayer during his sleepless nights, turning to religious devotion as a way to calm his mind. It wasn't uncommon for medieval kings to find comfort in prayer, particularly during moments of stress or insecurity. Charles, like many others, would pray to God for guidance and strength, hoping for divine intervention to ease his mind. Whether this helped him find rest or simply provided a temporary reprieve is still debated by historians. But what is clear is that prayer played a significant role in the nightly rituals of many monarchs. But not all kings turned to prayer or work to cope with their sleeplessness. Some sought the company of others, believing that the presence of trusted advisors or companions could help soothe their minds. This was especially true for kings who faced isolation, whether from political unrest, personal tragedy, or the pressures of ruling a vast empire. King Richard II of England, for example, often sought the companionship of his closest friends and confidants, relying on them to help distract him from the weight of his responsibilities. These late-night conversations weren't just casual. They were a means of reinforcing his sense of self and solidifying his authority. In a time when kings were often seen as the embodiment of divine will, maintaining a sense of control was crucial to their personal and political survival. In some cases, the royal family itself became a source of solace for troubled kings. King Henry IV of England, for instance, had a strained relationship with his son, Prince Henry, but during periods of stress and sleeplessness, he would turn to his son for support. The father-son relationship, particularly in the context of medieval kingship, was often fraught with tension as heirs were expected to prove their worthiness to rule. However, in moments of crisis, kings like Henry IV found comfort in the presence of their children, perhaps because they represented the future of the kingdom and the continuation of their legacy. Historians continue to debate the impact of these familial relationships on the mental health of kings. Did they find genuine comfort in the companionship of their children and advisors? Or was it simply a facade to maintain the appearance of strength? Some suggest that these late-night interactions were a form of coping mechanism, a way for the king to find emotional stability during turbulent times. Others argue that the relationships were more transactional, used to maintain a semblance of unity within the royal court. As we look at these different methods of coping with sleeplessness, it's clear that medieval kings didn't have one-size-fits-all solutions. Some sought solace in work, others in prayer, and still others in the company of those closest to them. The complexity of their coping mechanisms speaks to the immense pressures they faced as rulers, and the constant balancing act between personal well-being and political responsibility. In a world where a king's ability to sleep, or lack thereof, could influence the fate of an entire kingdom, the consequences of sleeplessness were far-reaching. But what about the more extreme methods that some kings turned to? As we've seen, some kings were known to indulge in physical pursuits like hunting or jousting to tire themselves out. Others, like King Charles VI of France, went even further, using unorthodox methods to try and regain control over their sleep. Charles VI, known as the Mad King, struggled with severe bouts of paranoia and delusions, which led to periods of complete isolation and erratic behavior. During some of these episodes, he reportedly insisted on sleeping in a locked room, surrounded by guards, in an attempt to protect himself from what he perceived as external threats. This extreme form of isolation, while seemingly bizarre, was born out of the king's deep anxiety and fear, showing just how far some monarchs would go to manage their sleeplessness and perceived vulnerability. Historians still argue whether Charles VI's behavior was truly indicative of mental illness, or if it was a response to the overwhelming pressures of ruling during a time of political instability. Some suggest that his sleeplessness and paranoid tendencies were a direct result of his fears of assassination and betrayal, while others argue that his mental state was exacerbated by his lack of sleep and the toll it took on his physical health. Regardless of the cause, Charles VI's story is a powerful reminder of the psychological strain that medieval kings often endured. As we approach the final sections of our journey through the sleepless nights of medieval kings, it's clear that their coping mechanisms were as varied as the kings themselves. From prayer to physical exertion, from familial support to extreme isolation, the ways in which kings sought rest reflect both the complexity of their lives and the pressures they faced as rulers. It's easy to forget that these monarchs, despite their wealth and power, were still human beings who grappled with the same struggles and uncertainties as anyone else. Now that we've examined the various ways in which medieval kings struggled with sleeplessness, let's take a moment to reflect on the darker side of royal insomnia, the consequences it had on their rule, and the kingdoms they governed. You see, as much as a king's sleepless nights could be a personal matter, they had a profound impact on the political stability of the realm. In a time when power was often as fragile as it was absolute, a king's inability to rest could cause ripple effects across his kingdom, leading to unrest, poor decision-making, and even outright rebellion. Take, for example, King Henry II of England. Known for his passionate temper and relentless drive, Henry's sleepless nights were often filled with fits of anger and frustration. These episodes didn't just affect his health, they affected the stability of his reign. Henry had a tumultuous relationship with his sons, particularly with his eldest, Henry the Young King. The father-son conflict was a constant source of stress for the king, and it's said that Henry's sleepless nights only intensified this tension. In fact, during one particularly heated period, Henry's inability to sleep drove him to make rash decisions that led to a civil war, known as the Revolt of 1173-1174, where his own sons rebelled against him. Historians still argue whether Henry's decisions during this time were directly influenced by his lack of sleep, or if they were more a result of his political ambitions and strained family dynamics. Some suggest that the stress and sleeplessness caused Henry to lash out, leading to a cycle of poor decisions and escalating conflict. Others believe that the revolt was more a product of the shifting power dynamics within his court and the growing ambition of his sons. Regardless of the cause, it's clear that Henry's sleepless nights played a significant role in one of the most challenging periods of his reign. But it wasn't just political instability that resulted from sleeplessness. Sometimes, a king's health deteriorated to the point where it directly affected his ability to rule. Consider the case of King Richard II of England. Richard's reign was marked by his increasing detachment from the day-to-day governance of the kingdom, and historians have long debated the reasons for his behavior. Some suggest that his mental health, possibly exacerbated by his sleeplessness, led to a decline in his decision-making abilities. Richard's inability to rest, or his refusal to delegate power, contributed to his eventual downfall. By the time he was deposed in 1399, Richard was often seen as an ineffective ruler, disconnected from his subjects and unable to manage the political crisis that was brewing in his court. Richard's case is a poignant reminder of how sleeplessness, when left unchecked, can slowly erode a monarch's authority. It's easy to picture Richard, tossing and turning in his royal bed, unable to find peace as the political tensions surrounding him mounted. His insomnia may have prevented him from thinking clearly, and his refusal to trust those around him led to further isolation. It's a tragic story, one where the king's inability to cope with his sleepless nights contributed to his ultimate fall from power. And then there was the case of King Charles VI of France, the infamous Mad King, who we've briefly touched on before. His sleeplessness wasn't just a personal struggle, it was a national crisis. Charles's paranoia and erratic behavior, which worsened during his sleepless nights, destabilized the French court and led to significant unrest. At one point, Charles was so consumed by his fears and anxieties that he believed he was made of glass, fearing that if he moved too quickly, he would shatter. This delusion, born out of sleep deprivation and mental strain, led to a breakdown in governance. The French court was thrown into disarray, and the kingdom's political stability was severely weakened. Historians still debate the nature of Charles's condition. Was it the result of his sleeplessness, or was it a deeper mental illness? Some argue that the stress of ruling a kingdom in the midst of the Hundred Years' War triggered Charles's breakdown, while others believe that his condition was a product of hereditary factors. Either way, it's clear that his sleepless nights contributed significantly to the collapse of his reign and the French monarchy's struggles during this turbulent period. As we look back on these stories of royal sleeplessness, it's clear that the consequences were far-reaching, from political instability to personal breakdowns. A king's inability to rest was more than just a personal ailment. It was a threat to the kingdom itself. But despite these challenges, many medieval kings did manage to find ways to cope, whether through prayer, physical exertion, or the support of their advisors and families. These coping mechanisms, though varied, were a testament to the resilience of these rulers, who had to balance their personal struggles with the immense weight of their crowns. Now, let's turn our attention to the more positive side of the story. While the sleepless nights of kings often came with negative consequences, there were also instances where a king's vigilance and dedication led to great achievements. Kings like Alfred the Great, who battled constant Viking invasions, used their sleepless nights to strategize and prepare for the challenges ahead. Alfred's ability to push through his fatigue and focus on his kingdom's survival is a powerful example of how sleeplessness can sometimes fuel determination and success. In the end, the sleepless nights of medieval kings remind us that even the most powerful rulers were still vulnerable to the pressures of their roles. Whether through political strife, personal struggles, or the demands of the throne, the king's relationship with sleep was a deeply complex and often consequential one. As we've seen, sleeplessness could lead to tragedy, but it could also inspire perseverance and resilience. The next time you find yourself lying awake at night, remember that even the kings and queens of history had their own restless nights. And sometimes, their ability to navigate those sleepless hours determined the fate of nations. Now that we've explored the profound impact of sleeplessness on medieval kings, it's time to take a more reflective turn. As we wrap up this journey through history, let's think about the deeper meaning behind these sleepless nights, not just for kings but for humanity as a whole. What does the inability to sleep tell us about the human experience? And what does it reveal about the pressures that even the most powerful among us face? We've already seen how sleep deprivation often took a toll on kings, sometimes resulting in poor decision-making, political unrest, and even mental breakdowns. But there's a flip side to this coin. For some kings, sleeplessness was a catalyst for reflection, creativity, and determination. There's something to be said about the clarity that can come from those long, quiet hours spent awake when the rest of the world is asleep. It's in these moments of solitude that some of the most influential decisions in history were made. Take, for instance, King Henry VIII of England, famous for his 6 marriages and his break with the Catholic Church. Henry VIII is a prime example of a king whose sleepless nights might have contributed to his larger-than-life decisions. While he was often driven by ambition and desire for power, Henry also had a deep yearning for a male heir, a desire that haunted him throughout his reign. The stress of this issue, paired with sleepless nights filled with anxiety over the future of his dynasty, likely shaped his decisions in ways we still study today. His sleepless nights weren't merely a reflection of his personal fears, but also the driving force behind his actions that forever altered the course of English history. Could he have made these same decisions if he had been well rested? Historians still debate the extent to which his lack of sleep shaped his kingdom's fate, but not all kings struggled with sleeplessness in the same way. Some kings, like Charlemagne, famously known for his tireless leadership and military prowess, were able to maintain their focus even during long, exhausting hours. Charlemagne's reign, which spanned much of the early Middle Ages, was marked by expansion and consolidation, and despite the relentless demands of governing such a vast empire, Charlemagne's ability to keep working, despite his fatigue, became part of his legacy. He slept very little, often staying awake late into the night to work on his reforms, correspond with allies, and, crucially, learn. His focus on education and wisdom, even in the dead of night, made him one of the most revered monarchs in history. It's clear that his sleepless nights didn't hinder his rule. In fact, they likely fueled it. In contrast, there were kings who viewed their sleeplessness as a necessary sacrifice. Take the case of King Louis XIV of France, often called the Sun King. Louis ruled France for over 70 years, and during his reign, he built one of the most extravagant courts in European history. However, this level of luxury and excess was not without its cost. Louis had a deep sense of duty to his nation, and during his later years, sleep became a rare commodity. He was known to work late into the night, giving orders, meeting with ministers, and even entertaining guests in the middle of the night. His ability to maintain his regal composure despite the lack of rest became a hallmark of his leadership. It's almost as if his sleeplessness was a sign of his unwavering commitment to his people, even as his health deteriorated. But what about the kings who were unable to cope with sleeplessness, who were defeated by it? Instead of using it to propel their reign forward, the cases we've explored of rulers like Charles VI of France or Richard II of England remind us that the inability to rest doesn't just affect decision-making. It can erode a leader's sense of self and their ability to connect with their subjects. Charles VI's madness, which resulted from his mental breakdown exacerbated by sleeplessness, had a devastating impact on France. Richard II's estrangement from his advisors, marked by isolation and distrust, was also partially a result of his inability to cope with his restless nights. For these kings, sleeplessness wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a profound disruption that ultimately led to their downfall. As we close this chapter on medieval kings and their sleepless nights, it's clear that the struggle for rest wasn't unique to any one ruler or time period. Whether you're a medieval monarch, an ancient philosopher, or a modern-day professional, sleep has always been a necessary, yet elusive, part of the human experience. The difference lies in how we choose to face it. Some kings use their sleeplessness as a driving force, channeling it into decision-making and leadership. Others found it to be their undoing. In the end, the way in which a ruler, or any individual for that matter, faces sleeplessness speaks volumes about their resilience, their priorities, and their understanding of what it means to be human. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, remember the kings who, like many of us, lay awake in the quiet darkness, their minds racing with the weight of the world. Some found peace, while others found turmoil, but all of them, in their own way, faced the same age-old challenge, the quest for rest. Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a really curious subject, the strange food diet of ancient Greek soldiers. Imagine this. It's the height of battle. The soldiers are trudging through dusty terrain, their bodies tired, and their minds sharper than ever as they prepare for whatever challenge awaits. But what exactly are they eating to fuel all this energy? Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive on their diet for long. But let's take a look at what kept these warriors going. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I always love hearing from all of you. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'll be imagining all of us, from every corner of the world, on this fascinating journey together. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's start with one of the most iconic military diets of ancient times, the Spartan diet. The Spartans were all about simplicity and toughness, and their soldiers weren't any different. Forget the royal feasts you might imagine from other ancient cultures. Spartan soldiers ate only the basics, and their meals were far from luxurious. One of their most famous dishes, and honestly the most controversial, was the black broth. Now, we're not talking about your typical, comforting bowl of soup. Black broth was made with blood, pork, vinegar, and salt, and was served to Spartan warriors to help them stay strong and focused. Historians still debate whether or not it was truly disgusting. Some claim it was flavorful, while others suggest it tasted more like a medicinal concoction. But it was hearty and filled with nutrients, and that's all that mattered. You see, these meals weren't designed to please the palate. They were designed to fuel the warriors for the challenges they would face the next day. Spartans were taught to value endurance, strength, and discipline, and their food was a reflection of these values. In fact, it was said that Spartan soldiers didn't just eat for nourishment, they ate to keep their minds sharp and their spirits tough. That's right, they used food as a tool for mental fortitude. Now that we've got our taste of Spartan cuisine, let's move on to another fascinating aspect of ancient Greek soldiers' diets, their reliance on bread and barley. While it might sound basic to us, bread was a staple of Greek soldiers' sustenance. But don't be fooled into thinking it was anything close to the fluffy loaves you might pick up at your local bakery. Greek bread was dense and often made from barley, which was a whole grain and far less refined than modern wheat bread. And this wasn't the kind of bread you'd be savoring with butter. Either, this was sustenance food, meant to fill the stomach without the luxury. Greek soldiers, especially in the earlier days, relied heavily on this barley bread. It was cheap, plentiful, and could be stored for long periods, making it ideal for long campaigns. A Greek soldier would often carry a loaf or two as they marched, nibbling on it between battles or during downtime. It wasn't just the bread that was vital, it was what the bread provided. Barley, high in fiber, was excellent for providing steady, slow-burning energy, just the thing you needed for those long, exhausting campaigns. And it wasn't just carbs. Barley was full of nutrients that could help soldiers keep their strength up, especially when supplies were low. Historians still argue whether the Greeks truly appreciated the nutritional value of barley bread, or if it was just a cheap and practical way to feed their troops. Some suggest that it was a matter of survival, while others think the Greeks might have thought of their bread as a kind of simple, honest sustenance that allowed them to focus on more important matters, like strategy and warfare. Either way, it was a major part of their diet, and their reliance on it speaks to how practicality often outweighed luxury when it came to meals. But let's face it, eating the same thing day in and day out can get pretty dull. So, Greek soldiers didn't just eat bread all the time. They had other components in their diet, though they were often far from extravagant. They'd throw together stews or soups with whatever they had on hand, tossing in vegetables, herbs, and sometimes fish or meat when available. This kind of improvisation wasn't just a matter of necessity. It was a sign of how adaptive and resourceful Greek soldiers had to be, both in the battlefield and in feeding themselves. Now that we've covered bread, the next key component of the ancient Greek soldiers' diet was meat. And to be more specific, the meat they had to work with, which wasn't always the freshest cut. Let's get this straight. Ancient Greek soldiers didn't enjoy the same access to meat that you might think of today. While they could hunt or raid for supplies, the average soldier didn't have an all-you-can-eat buffet of steak and roast chicken. Instead, they ate what they could catch or what was available. For the most part, the meat in their diet was simple, often consisting of pork, beef, or lamb. But what's interesting is that meat wasn't always the main course. It was more like a side dish to go with that hearty bread or a supplement to their stew. Now, don't go imagining large, juicy cuts of meat. Meat during these times had to be preserved and prepared in very specific ways. Sometimes it was salted, smoked, or dried to make it last longer on long military campaigns. The preservation method itself made the meat much tougher and more resilient, but also less flavorful. Think of it like a medieval beef jerky. Tough, salty, and probably more chew than savor. But for the soldiers in the field, it was valuable protein. The salt preserved it for long journeys, and the toughness ensured that it would withstand rough conditions without spoiling too quickly. However, It wasn't just about the practical side of meat. The Greeks also believed in the power of sacrifice, particularly when it came to animals. It wasn't unusual for kings or generals to offer a sacrifice before battle, often slaughtering an animal and consuming it as a symbol of their divine favor. Historians still debate whether these sacrifices were a genuine religious ritual or more of a morale-boosting act designed to rally the troops. Whatever the reason, the consumption of meat in this context was wrapped in both practical and symbolic significance. Despite the occasional feast, meat was considered a luxury, and not every soldier could expect it regularly. Meat was often reserved for the higher ranks or saved for special occasions. Most of the time, Greek soldiers would settle for simpler meals made from whatever they could find. That could be dried fish or the occasional poultry from a lucky hunting expedition. It wasn't about indulgence. It was about making the most of what they had and finding ways to survive on minimal resources. Moving beyond meat, let's talk about another staple of the ancient Greek soldiers' diet, legumes. If you've ever eaten a hearty bean stew or had lentils as a side, you've tasted a dish that's been around since the ancient times. In fact, beans and lentils were the workhorses of the ancient Greek diet, especially for soldiers who couldn't always rely on fresh meat. These legumes were packed with protein, fiber, and essential nutrients that were perfect for soldiers on the move. More than just a side dish, they were a key component of a soldier's caloric intake. Legumes were typically cooked into stews or mixed with other basic ingredients like barley, onions, and sometimes even a bit of olive oil. The Greeks didn't just enjoy them for their nutritional value. They were also easy to store and transport, making them ideal for military campaigns that might stretch over long periods. But let's be real here, despite all their benefits, beans weren't exactly the most glamorous meal. Imagine sitting down to a bowl of stewed lentils on a cold night, with nothing but the sound of distant battle drums filling the air. It might not sound too exciting, but it kept you alive. And sometimes, that's all you really need when you're a soldier deep behind enemy lines. Beans weren't just a regular part of the soldier's diet. They were the unsung heroes of ancient Greek military nutrition. They were cheap, available in bulk, and easy to prepare. And though they might not have been the most glamorous food, beans, lentils, and chickpeas were a cornerstone of a soldier's sustenance. Historians have found evidence that the ancient Greeks knew the importance of these foods, and often wrote about them in philosophical discussions, emphasizing how they could fuel not only the body but also the mind. But of course, like all foods, beans had their limits. Some soldiers, especially those on long campaigns, might have occasionally grown tired of eating the same legume-heavy meals day in and day out. As we know, repetition can wear on anyone, especially when you're forced to rely on what's at hand. That's when you might turn to something else for a bit of variety, and trust me, the Greeks had that covered with their famous stews. Often, beans were tossed in with bits of meat when available, or vegetables, creating a kind of makeshift stew that could be eaten by the ladleful. Still, for the most part, beans and lentils were the bulk of the Greek soldiers' survival diet, and while they may not have been the most exciting, they sure got the job done. Let's shift gears now to one of the more interesting aspects of an ancient Greek soldier's diet. The very unique and, dare I say, quirky additions to their meals. You've probably heard of olive oil being a staple in Mediterranean cuisine. But what if I told you that for the ancient Greek soldiers, it wasn't just used as a seasoning or for cooking, it was used for everything. You see, olive oil was so essential to ancient Greek life that it was considered not just a food item but also a versatile tool. It served as a source of fat for energy, but also as a protective balm for their bodies. A soldier could rub it on his skin for moisture and protection, especially after long days spent in the heat of battle or intense training. Olive oil was even used as a treatment for wounds. After a skirmish, when the blood was washed off, olive oil would be applied to wounds and scrapes as a way to cleanse and heal the skin. This might sound a little odd by today's standards, but in ancient Greece, olive oil was seen as a sort of panacea, an all-purpose fix. So, imagine a soldier after a day of march and battle, covered in dirt, sweat, and the occasional scrape, rubbing olive oil on his skin as a form of recovery. It was the ancient equivalent of a soothing lotion, and while it didn't exactly heal the wounds instantly, it kept their skin from drying out and becoming infected. And it probably helped that it smelled somewhat pleasant. 2. Historians still debate whether the health benefits of olive oil, like its modern-day reputation for heart health, were well understood back then, or if it was more of a folk remedy. Some suggest that the Greeks had no idea of its long-term health benefits, but they certainly recognized its versatility. After all, olive trees were abundant, and the oil was easy to extract. It was literally a gift from the gods that had multiple uses: food, medicine, skincare, giving soldiers a sense of comfort and protection in a time when life could be harsh. But olive oil wasn't the only curious food or product used by ancient Greek soldiers. For many soldiers, particularly those in the field, something as simple as bread could be an unexpected luxury. But this wasn't the fluffy, soft loaves we're used to today. Oh no, ancient Greek bread was hard and dense, more like a thick, dry biscuit. It was often dipped in wine or olive oil. Because, let's face it, just biting into it wasn't going to do anyone any favors. If you've ever had a stale piece of bread that felt like it could break a tooth, you'll understand why they needed a little wine or oil to make it more palatable. But you can't argue with the convenience. It was cheap, easy to store, and could last for days or even weeks, perfect for long campaigns on the move. Historians also argue whether these dry, tough breads were truly a staple of the soldiers' diet, or just something they had to endure because of limited resources. Some sources suggest that while they were incredibly practical, these hard breads were not always the preferred choice. But when you're out in the field, with little time or energy for fine dining, practicality wins, and if dipping that dense bread in wine made it go down easier, then that's what soldiers did. There was no shame in it. After all, food wasn't just about taste, it was about survival. Now, let's move on to another strange and interesting aspect of the ancient Greek soldiers' diet: the role of wine. For modern people, the idea of alcohol being part of a soldier's rations might seem a little unusual, but wine was actually a key component of the ancient Greek diet, especially in the military. While today we might associate soldiers with water or maybe energy drinks if you're lucky, ancient Greek soldiers were often provided wine, sometimes in great quantities, as a vital part of their daily nutrition. In fact, wine wasn't just a drink to wash down the occasional meal, it was a critical source of hydration, even more so than water. For a soldier on the move, you see, ancient Greek wine wasn't the fruity, sweet kind you might be used to today. No, it was a lot stronger and more potent, often watered down with equal parts water, sometimes more. This mixture would ensure that soldiers got their alcohol fix without getting too drunk to function. In fact, the watered-down wine served a few purposes. It made the wine last longer, allowed it to hydrate the body, and, believe it or not, helped kill off any bacteria in the water, which was often a problem in ancient times. But let's not kid ourselves. The primary role of wine in the soldiers' diet was as a tool for bonding and morale. Soldiers, after a long day of training or battle, would gather around their campfires or in their barracks, sharing cups of wine and stories. These shared moments were an essential part of maintaining camaraderie and unity among the troops. Wine in ancient Greece was a symbol of hospitality, friendship, and social cohesion. It wasn't just about the drink itself, it was the ritual that came with it. The act of drinking wine together in a communal space fostered a sense of belonging and trust, vital for a group of soldiers who depended on each other for survival. But what about the effects on the soldiers themselves? Historians still debate whether the consistent consumption of wine was beneficial for the soldiers' health, or whether it led to unwanted consequences. On the one hand, wine did provide some calories and energy for these physically demanding jobs. But on the other hand, its alcohol content could impair judgment and slow reaction times. In a military environment, where split-second decisions could mean the difference between life and death, the regular intake of alcohol had to be carefully managed. While the Greeks saw wine as a divine gift from Dionysus, their god of wine and revelry, they also knew the importance of moderation. After all, even the gods had their limits. Interestingly, while the soldiers drank wine as part of their daily routine, they weren't likely to get it in the form of fancy, modern bottles. The wine was usually stored in large clay vessels called amphorae, which were shipped in bulk from the various wine-producing regions across Greece. These amphorae would be sealed tightly with a wax coating and would keep the wine safe for long periods of time. Even on lengthy military campaigns, soldiers would drink straight from the amphorae, their fingers sticky with wine and the occasional sand or dust from the battlefield. The practice of wine drinking, though casual, was also a serious part of Greek military culture. There was also an interesting social aspect to wine in the military: the idea of the symposium. A symposium was a social gathering where participants would gather to drink wine, share stories, and engage in intellectual discussion. Now, don't mistake this for a casual dinner party. This was a highly structured event, one where the soldiers might debate philosophy, discuss military tactics, or simply enjoy each other's company. These symposia weren't just for the elite. They were also part of the soldier's life, offering an escape from the daily grind of war. Historians still argue whether these late-night symposia were truly beneficial to soldiers' mental states, or whether they served as distractions from the realities of battle. Some suggest they were therapeutic, offering soldiers a chance to unwind and bond before heading back to the front lines. Others claim that these symposia were just another form of escapism, a way to avoid confronting the harshness of war. Regardless, they were certainly an essential part of ancient Greek life, especially among soldiers. As we move further into the dietary habits of ancient Greek soldiers, let's turn our attention to a truly bizarre and fascinating aspect: the practice of eating strange or unusual foods, some of which were believed to have unique properties that could enhance performance or fortify the body. One of the most well-known examples of this odd diet was the practice of consuming black broth. Now, I know what you're thinking. Black broth doesn't sound like anything you'd want to try, let alone as part of a soldier's meal plan. But bear with me for a moment, because this dark, mysterious concoction played an important role in the Spartan diet. Black broth was essentially a stew made from a mixture of blood, salt, vinegar, and some form of meat, typically pork. The broth was thick, salty, and quite strong in flavor, giving it the black appearance that earned it its name. This meal, which was consumed regularly by Spartan soldiers, was thought to provide them with the essential nutrients they needed to sustain themselves during long campaigns or periods of intense physical exertion. For the Spartans, who were known for their rigorous training and military prowess, the black broth was more than just a source of sustenance. It was seen as an integral part of their identity. But what was the reasoning behind such an odd choice of food? The black broth was thought to have several benefits for the soldiers who consumed it. First and foremost, it was considered a source of strength and endurance. The combination of blood, salt, and vinegar was believed to provide the soldiers with the necessary minerals and proteins to maintain their strength during long, grueling battles. It was a meal that could fuel them for hours of physical exertion without weighing them down. It was also said to be highly fortifying, especially in harsh conditions. For the Spartans, who had to endure extreme physical challenges as part of their military training, the black broth was seen as a sort of secret weapon. Now, historians are still debating the exact benefits of black broth. Some believe that it was a food that was deliberately designed to be unpleasant, a sort of mental challenge for soldiers to overcome. After all, the Spartans were known for their stoic nature and their ability to endure hardship without complaint. For them, eating something as odd and unappetizing as black broth may have been a form of mental discipline, a way to build resilience. Others suggest that it may have had practical health benefits, such as providing a quick source of calories and electrolytes during the heat of battle. Whether it was psychological or nutritional, there's no denying that black broth held an important place in the Spartan soldiers' diet. The practice of consuming black broth wasn't just limited to the Spartans, though it's believed that other Greek soldiers, particularly those engaged in long campaigns, may have also consumed similar concoctions to maintain their strength. While the specifics of the recipes might have varied, the idea of using simple, hearty ingredients to create a nourishing, energizing meal was a common theme in the Greek military diet. Interestingly, these broths weren't just a food source, they were also a symbol of the warrior ethos that defined Greek soldiers. For modern scholars, black broth presents an intriguing historical enigma. Some argue that the practice of consuming blood-based broths was simply a reflection of the ancient Greek belief in the power of blood, something that was seen as a source of life and vitality. Others suggest that these broths might have had practical uses, such as providing a quick and efficient way to prepare meals for large numbers of soldiers in the field. Whatever the reasoning behind it, the consumption of black broth stands as a testament to the resourcefulness of ancient Greek warriors. But let's not get too hung up on just the black broth. It wasn't the only strange food on the ancient Greek soldiers' menu. Along with the black broth, Greek soldiers were known to consume a variety of other unusual and nutrient-dense foods that would have seemed odd to us today. For example, dried fish and salted meats were common, as they could be stored for long periods of time and were easy to transport during military campaigns. These preserved foods provided essential protein and calories to soldiers who had to march for days or weeks without access to fresh food. But perhaps the most unusual of all was the consumption of cheese and honey in some military rations. While cheese is a staple in many diets today, it wasn't always as widely appreciated in the ancient world. However, in ancient Greece, cheese was considered an excellent source of sustenance for soldiers. Paired with honey, it provided a combination of protein, fat, and sugar, making it an ideal high-energy snack for soldiers on the move. The combination of cheese and honey was both nutritious and portable, making it a convenient option for soldiers who needed to keep up their strength during long, hard marches. Historians still debate the exact origins of the practice of eating cheese and honey, but it's likely that it came from a time when food preservation techniques were limited, and soldiers had to rely on simple yet effective sources of nutrition. Whether it was the richness of the cheese or the sweetness of the honey that made this combination appealing is uncertain. But there's no denying that it played an important role in the sustenance of the ancient Greek army. As we continue to explore the strange and surprising dietary choices of ancient Greek soldiers, it's important to note that the way food was consumed wasn't just about practicality, it was also deeply connected to the cultural and religious practices of the time. For many Greek soldiers, the food they ate wasn't merely sustenance, it was tied to rituals, beliefs, and customs that helped them navigate the harsh realities of war and military life. So, as we've already discussed how the food choices were designed to energize the body, let's look into the sacred and symbolic meaning behind some of these meals. One of the most fascinating and ritualistic foods that was consumed by Greek soldiers was the sacred offering of barley cakes. Barley, in ancient Greece, was considered one of the most sacred grains, often used in religious offerings to the gods. The importance of barley was so profound that it was seen as a symbol of prosperity and the connection between the divine and human realms. Soldiers would often partake in barley cakes before battle or during times of spiritual reflection, making it not just a meal, but a ritual of invigoration and divine connection. The barley cake, often made from ground barley flour mixed with water and sometimes honey or olive oil, was a simple, hearty food that could be easily carried during long campaigns. However, its significance wasn't only in its nutrition, it was woven into the very fabric of Greek military life. Before battle, soldiers would gather together to share the meal as a form of unity and camaraderie. They would eat the barley cakes while offering prayers or invoking the gods for strength and victory in the upcoming conflict. Historians still argue about the precise religious significance of the barley cake in the context of military life. Some suggest that it was a form of divine protection, a way for soldiers to ensure that they had the gods' favor before going into battle. Others believe that the act of eating together, sharing in the same ritual, was more of a psychological tool to build morale and solidarity among the soldiers. Either way, the ritual surrounding the barley cake played an important part in the lives of Greek soldiers, helping them align themselves with higher powers, at least spiritually, before they went to war. And while barley cakes were a staple of the soldiers' diet, there were also other foods tied to religious significance. For instance, the consumption of wine was another important ritual that extended beyond simple nourishment. Wine was a key part of Greek religious ceremonies, often used as an offering to gods such as Dionysus, the god of wine and revelry. During the military campaigns, wine wasn't just a drink for relaxation, it was often used in a ceremonial context, linking the warrior's actions with divine will. Before heading into battle or during moments of downtime, soldiers would partake in a communal drink of wine, toasting not just to their health, but to the gods, invoking their protection and blessings, while the alcohol itself helped soldiers unwind. The ritual of drinking together was far more significant than just getting tipsy. It was a moment of shared solidarity, a brief escape from the constant pressure of battle, and a reaffirmation of their connection to the divine. Interestingly, ancient Greek soldiers weren't the only ones who incorporated food and drink into their rituals. Many ancient cultures believed that what they ate, and how they ate, had the potential to influence the outcome of battles. In the Greek military, food wasn't just about strength, it was about shaping the fate of the war itself. And so, the humble barley cake or the ceremonial cup of wine became something far greater than just food. It was a tool for psychological and spiritual warfare. In some cases, the relationship between food and spirituality in Greek military life was more personal. Consider the instance of special dietary treatments offered to soldiers after particularly grueling battles. After days of exhausting combat and scarce resources, some generals would order that a rich meal be prepared for their troops. These meals weren't just designed to provide sustenance, they were often elaborate feasts that aimed to restore the warrior's mental and emotional states. These were meals of renewal, meant to reassure soldiers that despite the hardships, they were still valued and cared for by their commanders. Historians are still unsure whether these post-battle feasts had a lasting effect on the soldiers' morale, or if they were simply a way to mark the end of one chapter before moving on to the next. However, there's no doubt that the Greeks understood the importance of food as more than mere sustenance. It was a psychological weapon, a source of reassurance and morale building for warriors on the front lines. The fact that meals could be used to renew a soldier's spirit is a testament to how deeply intertwined food, culture, and warfare were in the ancient world. So, next time you sit down to a meal, remember that the power of food goes far beyond just filling your stomach. In ancient Greece, what soldiers ate, how they ate it, and when they ate it all played a role in their psychological state and success in battle. Food, it seems, was both a tool for strength and a balm for the soul, something that helped soldiers prepare for battle, heal from the wounds of war, and build the mental resilience they needed to survive another day. As we continue our exploration of the strange food habits of ancient Greek soldiers, it's important to remember that the relationship between a warrior and food wasn't just about getting the nutrients necessary for survival, it was also about fortifying the spirit. The food consumed by these soldiers was often symbolic, reinforcing both their physical strength and their sense of identity as warriors. In a time when the line between the sacred and the secular was blurry, the food served in the ranks was a powerful tool for psychological fortitude. Let's shift focus to one of the most fascinating yet often overlooked foods in the diet of Greek soldiers: salted fish. While the diet of soldiers was primarily made up of staples like barley, wheat, and olives, salted fish played a surprisingly important role in keeping the army sustained during long military campaigns. Fish was a valuable source of protein, and salting it made it easier to store for long periods of time, especially when fresh food was scarce or when soldiers were stationed far from the sea. Now, the idea of salted fish might not seem as glamorous as feasts of roasted meats or grand banquets, but in the harsh realities of war, it was a crucial sustenance. Salted fish was a great preservative and could be eaten without worrying about refrigeration or spoilage, and it provided an easy meal that could be carried in rations for extended periods. But beyond its practical value, salted fish carried deeper cultural significance. Salt was considered sacred in ancient Greece, symbolizing purification, life, and abundance. It was used in offerings to the gods and even in religious rituals. In fact, many ancient Greek texts reference the use of salt in daily life as a purifier, something that cleansed and protected individuals. So, when soldiers ate salted fish, they weren't just nourishing their bodies, they were consuming something that had symbolic resonance. It was a food tied to the divine, to the forces of life and death, and a reminder of their connection to higher powers. Historians still argue over how much of this symbolism was truly understood or felt by the soldiers themselves. But there's no doubt that salted fish was more than just a practical foodstuff. For some soldiers, it likely carried a psychological weight that made their meals feel more potent, as though they were consuming something infused with divine protection. Whether or not they believed in the mystical properties of salt, they were certainly eating a food that had been revered for centuries. But salted fish wasn't the only food that had spiritual significance. For some Greek soldiers, bread became a symbol of sustenance and survival. Bread was a daily staple, often made from barley or wheat, and it represented the constant, reliable foundation upon which their diet was built. However, what's interesting about bread in ancient Greece is that it wasn't simply seen as a utilitarian food. It was often the centerpiece of religious rituals as well. Offering bread to the gods was a common practice, and it was also used in ceremonies as a symbol of life, prosperity, and gratitude. In fact, the act of breaking bread was symbolic of unity and community, values that were vital to the survival and cohesion of a military force. Soldiers, when gathered around their fires at night or sharing a meal, often broke bread together as a sign of solidarity. This act of eating together wasn't just about filling their stomachs. It was about reinforcing bonds within the group, reminding everyone that they were part of something greater than themselves. Historians suggest that the role of bread in Greek military culture could also be seen as a psychological tool. In times of battle or hardship, sharing bread was a way for soldiers to reaffirm their commitment to one another, creating a sense of community and shared purpose. This, in turn, helped maintain morale and cohesion among the ranks, which was especially important when soldiers were isolated in foreign lands or caught in the chaos of war. It's remarkable how something as simple as bread could provide not just sustenance, but a sense of psychological safety. The role of bread and salted fish in the diet of Greek soldiers illustrates the larger relationship between food and identity in ancient Greece. It wasn't just about survival, it was about meaning. As soldiers weren't merely eating to stay alive, they were eating as a way to connect with their gods, their comrades, and their sense of purpose as warriors. The food they consumed wasn't just a physical need, it was a reflection of their place in the world and their connection to something larger than themselves. And yet, the psychological effects of food on the soldier's mind didn't end there. Consider the impact of luxury foods. In some cases, after a particularly brutal battle, kings or military leaders would order a lavish feast for their troops, offering exotic delicacies and rare wines to celebrate victories or to lift the morale of a weary army. These feasts weren't just about providing comfort, they were a form of reward, a gesture of gratitude for the soldiers' sacrifices, and a means of reinforcing the leader's authority and generosity. Historians debate the effectiveness of such feasts in truly improving the soldiers' morale. Some argue that they were simply symbolic acts of generosity, designed to maintain the king's image and reinforce loyalty. Others suggest that these feasts had real psychological benefits, giving soldiers a brief respite from the brutalities of war and allowing them to feel valued and appreciated. Either way, the inclusion of luxury foods in the military diet highlights the complex relationship between food, power, and identity in ancient Greece. These meals weren't just about nutrition, they were part of a larger system of social and psychological dynamics that influenced the way soldiers experienced war. Ultimately, the food choices of Greek soldiers were a reflection of the culture and worldview in which they lived. What they ate was deeply tied to their spirituality, their sense of community, and their connection to both their leaders and the divine. Food, for these soldiers, was not just a necessity, it was a source of strength, comfort, and meaning. Now that we've explored the psychological and spiritual connections that Greek soldiers had with their food, it's time to dig deeper into the practical aspects of their diet and how it functioned as both sustenance and strategic necessity. During times of war, the Greek army had to rely on a mix of practicality and resourcefulness to ensure that soldiers were fed and kept in fighting shape. This often meant having a mobile, portable diet that could withstand long campaigns and limited access to fresh food. Let's begin by examining one of the more iconic and functional foods that were integral to the diet of the Greek soldiers, the pita bread. Not just an everyday food, pita was considered an ideal choice for soldiers, due to its portability and simplicity. This flatbread was made from flour, water, and salt, sometimes with a touch of oil or herbs mixed in, making it a quick and easy meal for a soldier on the move. Pita bread could be baked over a fire, in a simple clay oven, or wrapped around other ingredients, like dried meats, cheeses, and vegetables, creating a compact and filling ration. Imagine a soldier sitting around a fire late at night after a long march. He would tear off pieces of warm pita bread, dunking it into a bowl of olive oil, or use it as a wrap to hold bits of salted fish, cheese, and perhaps some dried fruit. The bread's durability, coupled with the flexibility to store ingredients within it, made it a perfect meal for a soldier far from home, in need of something quick and efficient. It was a practical, satisfying meal that provided the energy needed to keep going, but also a reminder of home, as it was often made with simple, locally sourced ingredients. But the Greek soldiers' food wasn't just about practicality, it also had a distinct tactical edge. Take wine, for example. While we often think of wine as a luxury or drink of leisure, it was also a critical part of a soldier's ration. Soldiers, especially in the early stages of a campaign, were often given wine diluted with water as part of their daily diet. The wine helped to kill bacteria and improve the taste of water, which was often contaminated or unpalatable during long travels. What's fascinating about wine in the Greek military diet is the cultural significance it carried. In ancient Greece, wine wasn't just a drink, it was associated with the gods, particularly Dionysus, the god of wine, revelry, and ecstasy. Drinking wine was seen as a way of honoring the gods, even in the context of war. Historians argue that this cultural reverence for wine likely helped soldiers feel a sense of connection to something greater than themselves, even in the midst of battle. The act of drinking wine wasn't just about quenching thirst. It was part of a larger ritual that tied them to the divine and to their sense of identity as Greek warriors. Of course, not all wine was consumed in the same way. For higher-ranking officers or those who had earned it through valorous deeds, there would be access to pure wine, a much stronger and more refined version. But for the majority of the soldiers, the diluted wine was a far more practical choice, easier to transport and more versatile in use, whether used for ritualistic purposes or simply as a way to make water safer to drink. Wine was a key part of their survival. In addition to these practical and symbolic foods, the Greek soldiers' diet also included dried meats, such as beef jerky, which could be preserved for months and transported without worry of spoilage. These dried meats were incredibly important during long campaigns, especially when the army was on the move, and fresh food was hard to come by. Dried meat was a source of protein, something that was essential for maintaining strength during the grueling marches and battles. One particularly interesting aspect of dried meat in the Greek military diet was how it could be combined with honey to create a food that served both as nourishment and a morale booster. While honey was often used as a sweetener, it was also an important preservative, as it helped to keep meat fresh longer. Soldiers might wrap pieces of dried meat in honey, or coat them with the golden substance to enhance flavor and durability. This combination of sweetness and saltiness made for a surprisingly satisfying and efficient ration. It also reflects the ingenuity of the Greek military, who were able to make the most of the resources they had. While these foods were essential to the Greek soldiers' physical survival, their diet also had a significant impact on their mental resilience. As we've seen, food wasn't just about sustenance, it was a source of psychological comfort and a way to bond with comrades. Sharing a meal was one of the few moments of calm in the midst of war, and it helped build camaraderie among the soldiers. Imagine a group of soldiers gathered around a fire, passing around bowls of pita bread, sipping diluted wine, and savoring bits of salted fish or dried meat. In these moments, the weight of their duties was momentarily lifted, and they could simply be men, sharing food and stories, finding solace in each other's company. Historians still argue about the exact role that food played in the morale of soldiers during ancient campaigns. Some believe that these communal meals were essential to maintaining cohesion and unity, especially in times of extreme stress. Others argue that food was just another tool in the larger system of military logistics, a necessary component of keeping the army fed and functional. Regardless of the debate, it's clear that the food consumed by Greek soldiers wasn't just about survival. It was about maintaining mental and emotional strength in the face of hardship. As we reflect on the food that sustained these ancient warriors, we're reminded of how the act of eating, whether in times of peace or war, is a deeply human experience. For the Greek soldier, food was a reminder of home, a connection to the divine, and a symbol of the bonds that held the army together, even in the harshest of circumstances, when the world seemed like it might collapse around them. A warm piece of pita bread or a sip of wine offered a small but significant moment of peace. As we continue our exploration of the strange and often surprising foods that sustained ancient Greek soldiers during their sleepless nights, let's take a deeper dive into the more unusual dietary habits that played a crucial role in their survival on the battlefield. While the staples like bread, wine, and dried meat were essential, there were also more obscure and often unappetizing foods that soldiers would rely on to stave off hunger and fatigue. One such food was barley gruel. A humble but vital staple in the Greek military diet, barley was one of the most common grains consumed by soldiers, as it was relatively easy to grow, inexpensive, and nutritious. Barley gruel, essentially a porridge made from boiled barley and water, provided soldiers with much-needed energy and sustenance during long campaigns. While it might not sound appetizing to us today, barley gruel was a regular part of a soldier's daily diet and a practical choice. Given its simplicity and portability, imagine a soldier sitting by a campfire, stirring a pot of barley gruel, waiting for it to cook over an open flame. The steam rises, and the smell is far from pleasant, earthy, heavy, with a faintly bitter note. Still, the soldier stirs it, knowing that it will provide the necessary fuel for the long march ahead. Often, the gruel would be enhanced with a pinch of salt, herbs, or a splash of olive oil, which added some flavor and improved the nutritional content. But in the end, the appeal of barley gruel lay in its ability to fill the stomach, providing soldiers with enough calories to endure the hardships of war. Historians still debate how much the taste of such simple and bland food impacted soldiers' morale. Some suggest that the monotonous diet was a source of frustration for the soldiers, leading to dissatisfaction and discontent. Others argue that, for the Greek soldiers, the gruel was a necessary part of their survival, a humble, dependable food that helped them endure the harsh realities of war. Whatever the case, barley gruel was a mainstay in the diet of Greek soldiers, often consumed in large quantities to keep their bodies fueled for the next battle. While gruel may have been a staple, it was far from the only food that soldiers turned to during their sleepless nights. Another fascinating and somewhat surprising food used by the ancient Greeks was cheese, specifically hard cheeses like feta or casseri. Unlike fresh cheeses, which would spoil quickly, hard cheeses could be kept for long periods without refrigeration, making them ideal for soldiers who were always on the move. Cheese, with its rich fat content and salty flavor, provided an excellent source of protein and energy. It was also easy to transport, often wrapped in cloth or placed in wooden containers to prevent it from spoiling. Picture a soldier tearing off a chunk of cheese from a small wheel, savoring its crumbly texture and tangy flavor as he sits around a fire with his comrades. The cheese is often paired with a small piece of bread or a sip of diluted wine. A simple but satisfying combination. For soldiers like these, cheese was more than just a snack. It was a vital part of their daily rations, offering sustenance and comfort in the midst of the chaos of war. The durability of the cheese, coupled with its rich nutritional profile, made it a practical and reliable source of energy. Historians still argue about the exact role that cheese played in the Greek military diet. Some suggest that it was a luxury food, reserved for special occasions, while others believe it was a more regular part of the diet, available to soldiers throughout their campaigns, regardless of its frequency. Cheese was an important food that provided both physical nourishment and a small comfort in the midst of a difficult and dangerous life. Of course. As much as cheese and gruel helped sustain soldiers, they were not enough to alleviate the emotional and psychological toll of war. This is where honey came in, playing a vital role in both the physical and mental well-being of Greek soldiers. Honey, a sweet, golden substance harvested from bees, was considered a food of both luxury and health. It was often used as a sweetener for various dishes, but it was also believed to have medicinal properties, particularly when combined with herbs or other ingredients. Honey was used in numerous ways to help soothe the mind and body. Soldiers might mix it into their gruel, adding a touch of sweetness to the otherwise bland meal. It could also be combined with wine or warm water to create a calming drink before sleep. The soothing properties of honey were believed to help promote relaxation and induce sleep, making it an ideal remedy for sleepless nights on the battlefield. Imagine a soldier, worn out from a day of marching, sitting down with a small cup of warm, honeyed water, the sweetness coating his throat as he slowly sips it, hoping that it will bring some respite from the fatigue and anxiety that gnaws at him. Historians still debate whether honey was truly an effective sleep aid, or if it simply served as a placebo, offering soldiers a sense of comfort during stressful times. Some scholars believe that the ritual of drinking honeyed water or consuming honey before sleep was an important psychological practice, helping soldiers to feel a sense of control over their environment. Even if the actual benefits were minimal, others suggest that honey, with its natural sugars and soothing properties, did indeed help to relax the body and mind, making it a valuable part of the Greek soldiers' diet. As we continue to reflect on the role of food in the lives of ancient Greek soldiers, we see how their diet was intricately tied to both their survival and their mental fortitude. From humble barley gruel to the sweetness of honey, each food served a dual purpose, not just to provide sustenance, but to help soldiers navigate the physical and psychological challenges of war. The diet of these soldiers wasn't just about nutrition, it was about finding comfort, solace, and strength in the food they ate. A reminder that even in the harshest of times, a small meal could offer a sense of peace and stability amidst the chaos. As we move forward in our exploration of ancient Greek soldiers' diets, it becomes clear that their relationship with food went beyond mere sustenance. It was also deeply connected to their worldview and their understanding of life and death. This connection to food wasn't just about physical survival, but was also about maintaining a sense of control in a world that often seemed chaotic and dangerous. Take wine. For example, wine was a central element in the diet of a Greek soldier, but it wasn't consumed simply for pleasure. Wine was seen as a vital part of Greek life, deeply embedded in both social and religious practices. During meals, wine was often diluted with water to make it last longer and to prevent drunkenness. The ritual of drinking diluted wine was an essential part of Greek culture, whether at a soldier's dinner table or during religious ceremonies. Wine had a purpose beyond just relaxation. Picture yourself as a soldier in the midst of a long campaign, surrounded by fellow warriors under a starlit sky. The clinking of metal cups fills the air as soldiers gather around a fire, each drinking wine mixed with water, sharing stories of past battles and fears of the ones to come. The wine, though diluted, still carries the familiar warmth, soothing the soldiers' nerves and offering a brief respite from the anxiety of warfare. This simple ritual, drinking and sharing a cup, became an important means of maintaining camaraderie and collective strength in the face of a harsh, unpredictable environment. Historians still debate the role of wine in the Greek soldiers' diet. Was it merely a psychological comfort, a way of unwinding during the tension of war, or did it serve a deeper medicinal purpose? Some suggest that the wine's calming properties helped soldiers deal with the mental stress of war, while others point out that the alcohol could also have served as an early form of antiseptic, helping to clean wounds or stave off illness. Regardless of its true purpose, wine was an important and revered part of the diet, a drink that connected soldiers to their culture and traditions. Moving beyond the more well-known staples, there were also the herbal infusions used to treat various ailments and improve the mental state of soldiers. Greek soldiers often relied on herbal remedies to stay healthy and combat the stress of constant campaigning. Some herbs, like sage and mint, were commonly used to soothe headaches, aid digestion, and even calm the mind before sleep. Others, like oregano and thyme, were believed to have protective qualities, warding off infections and promoting overall well-being. Imagine a soldier sitting by the campfire, drinking a steaming cup of mint tea, the aroma of the herbs rising gently in the air. The warmth of the tea is comforting, its subtle flavor offering a moment of peace in the otherwise chaotic surroundings. The tea not only helps to calm the body but also soothe the mind, allowing the soldier a brief moment of respite from the anxiety and fear that haunt him during the long hours of darkness. For many soldiers, these herbal teas became an essential part of their nightly routine, a comforting, healing ritual that offered both physical relief and psychological comfort. Historians still argue whether the herbs used by ancient Greek soldiers were truly effective in their medicinal properties, or if their use was more about placebo and psychological comfort. Some suggest that the herbs did provide real benefits, particularly in terms of calming the mind and body, while others believe that the benefits were largely symbolic, offering soldiers a sense of control over their environment in a world where little was predictable. Regardless of their true effects, these herbal infusions were an important part of the soldiers' routines, contributing to their sense of well-being during the pressures of war. Of course, no conversation about the diet of ancient Greek soldiers would be complete without considering the impact of food storage. Soldiers, often far from home, needed to rely on foods that could be stored for long periods without spoiling. Dried fish, salted meat, and cheese were common provisions, as they could be preserved for long journeys or long periods of siege. These foods were not just about convenience, they were also about sustenance, providing soldiers with the energy needed to endure long marches and harsh conditions. Imagine a soldier biting into a tough, dried piece of meat, its salty taste lingering on his tongue. The texture is dry, the flavor pungent, but it provides the necessary energy to keep moving forward. For soldiers on extended campaigns, these preserved foods were crucial for survival. They may not have been the most flavorful or appetizing meals, but they were practical, reliable, and essential in sustaining the body for the long haul. Historians still debate the effectiveness of preserved foods in maintaining the health of soldiers, while some argue that the high salt content could have been detrimental to their health, leading to dehydration and kidney issues. Others suggest that these foods were vital to the survival of soldiers, offering necessary calories and protein when fresh food was unavailable. Regardless of their impact on health, the practicality of these preserved foods cannot be denied. They were crucial to the success of military campaigns and a key part of the Greek soldiers' diet. As we reflect on these diverse foods and remedies, we see that the ancient Greek soldiers' diet was a complex mix of practicality, tradition, and psychological comfort, from the nutritional value of grains and dried meats to the calming effects of herbal infusions and the cultural importance of wine. Food was an essential part of the soldiers' survival and mental resilience. In the face of adversity, these soldiers relied on their diet not just to survive, but to thrive, finding strength in the simplest of meals, and perhaps in the rituals and traditions that came with them. As we continue to dive into the complexities of the ancient Greek soldiers' diet, it's essential to understand that their food choices were not simply about maintaining physical health, but were deeply intertwined with their spiritual practices. The ancient Greeks viewed food as sacred, and its consumption was often tied to rituals, offerings, and sacrifices. This connection between food and the divine played a significant role in the lives of soldiers, particularly when they were far from home and immersed in the chaotic, unpredictable life of warfare. Imagine the scene. It's early morning in a camp of Greek soldiers, and they gather around a small altar, offering their first fruits or a handful of barley to the gods. This act of devotion was more than a religious ritual. It was also a way of showing gratitude for the food they had and seeking divine favor for their endeavors. Soldiers believed that by honoring the gods with food offerings, they would receive the strength and protection needed to survive the hardships of battle. The ancient Greeks saw food as a direct link between the mundane world and the divine, and the soldiers' meals were often seen as acts of worship. As you watch the soldiers perform these rituals, the atmosphere is filled with reverence. The flickering light of an offering candle illuminates their faces, and the hum of a quiet prayer fills the air. Some of the soldiers hold bowls of honey cakes or barley bread, offering them to the gods in hope of a good harvest or successful campaign. The simplicity of the food, the humble grains and honey, speaks to the Greek philosophy of balance and harmony between the earthly and the divine. These offerings, though small, were vital to maintaining the spiritual well-being of the soldiers, providing them with both peace of mind and a sense of connection to something larger than themselves. Historians still debate the extent to which these rituals influenced the soldiers' morale and effectiveness in battle. Did the offerings truly provide divine protection, or were they simply symbolic acts of faith? Some suggest that the rituals helped soldiers feel more grounded, offering them a sense of purpose and meaning during the chaos of war. Others argue that the offerings were more about cultural tradition, providing comfort during times of uncertainty and reinforcing the social bonds within the military camp. Regardless of their true impact, these acts of devotion were a cornerstone of the soldiers' daily routine, highlighting the deep spiritual connection between the ancient Greeks and their food. Yet, even as the soldiers performed their sacred rituals, the more mundane realities of their diet continued to play a vital role in their survival. After the religious offerings, meals were often simple affairs. Bread, cheese, and dried meats continued to dominate their meals. providing the necessary sustenance for their grueling days. Soldiers would gather around a communal fire, breaking bread together as they shared stories, strategized for the next day's battle, or simply found comfort in one another's company. The food, though basic, was a source of community, a unifying factor that brought the soldiers together in a way that transcended the hardships of war. These shared meals, often served in wooden bowls or eaten with stoneware cups, helped foster a sense of camaraderie. The act of eating together was not just about nourishment, it was about reinforcing the bonds between the soldiers, creating a sense of belonging and solidarity that was vital for their mental and emotional resilience. Historians still debate the exact role of food in fostering this sense of community. Some argue that food was one of the few comforts soldiers had during campaigns, providing a break from the stresses of battle and leadership. Others suggest that the rituals surrounding food, such as communal meals and offerings, were a key part of reinforcing the soldiers' sense of unity, helping them remain focused and motivated in the face of constant danger. Regardless of the cause, these shared meals were essential to the soldiers' emotional survival during the turbulent campaigns they faced. In the midst of all this, we must remember that food was also functional. It wasn't just about comfort or ritual. The diet of the ancient Greek soldier had a clear purpose. It was designed to fuel them for the demands of battle and war. The soldiers needed energy and endurance, so their meals were carefully chosen to provide the calories and nutrients necessary for their physical exertion. Lentils, beans, and barley were staples, providing soldiers with a steady source of energy throughout the day. The humble lentil, rich in protein and fiber, played a key role in their diet, allowing them to remain strong and capable despite long hours of marching or fighting. Picture yourself in the midst of a long march, trudging across rugged terrain. Your stomach growls, but your ration of lentils and barley provides the energy you need to keep moving. The simple dish of lentils, boiled with a pinch of salt and a splash of olive oil, is more than just food, it's fuel for your body and your mission. These meals, though unexciting, were designed for function, ensuring that soldiers could continue their duties without succumbing to exhaustion. They were sustenance, plain and simple, but absolutely essential to the soldiers' survival and effectiveness. Historians still debate the nutritional value of these ancient meals. Were they sufficient to meet the soldiers' needs, or were they merely a stopgap solution in times of scarcity? Some believe that these diets provided enough sustenance for soldiers to perform their duties, while others argue that the lack of variety and fresh produce could have led to deficiencies, especially during prolonged campaigns. Regardless, the diet of the Greek soldier was functional and effective for the time, designed not for luxury or indulgence, but for practicality and endurance in the face of relentless warfare. As we continue exploring the ancient Greek soldiers' food journey, let's focus on a crucial aspect of their diet: the role of wine in both their daily lives and their military campaigns. It may seem like an odd choice to consider wine as a necessary component of a soldier's diet, but the ancient Greeks saw it as more than just a drink for leisure or celebration. Wine was an essential part of their nutritional intake, and its importance stretched far beyond the feasts or banquets of the upper classes. For the common soldier, wine was both a nutritional necessity and a cultural tradition. Imagine this. After a long, tiring day of marching or fighting, the soldiers gather around their campfires, each holding a wooden cup of diluted wine, a practice that was common because pure wine was far too strong to drink in large quantities. The wine was often mixed with water or herbs to make it more palatable and to stretch it further, ensuring that it could be consumed as a sustenance rather than a luxury. For the soldiers, this wine wasn't about indulgence. It was about survival. Wine was often diluted with water, herbs, or spices to provide both nutrition and hydration. In a world where clean water wasn't always readily available, the Greeks believed that the alcohol in wine could act as a disinfectant, making it safer to drink. This allowed the soldiers to hydrate during long marches or in situations where access to fresh water was limited, while also enjoying the comforting properties of wine. The wine helped lift the spirits, giving the soldiers a brief respite from the harsh realities of warfare, even if it was only for a short time. The tradition of sharing wine was also deeply embedded in the military culture of the time. A soldier's bond with his comrades was often reinforced over a shared cup, making the act of drinking wine an important social ritual. Even though the soldiers' meals were simple and practical, these moments of sharing a cup of wine helped to foster unity and camaraderie among the troops. It was an opportunity for them to relax, if only momentarily, and share stories, jokes, or plans for the future. Historians still debate the nutritional role of wine in the soldiers' diets. Some argue that it was purely symbolic, a part of the Greeks' love of ritual and social connection, while others suggest that wine's medicinal properties were more significant. Ancient Greek physicians often recommended wine for a variety of ailments, from digestive issues to wounds, and it was even believed to have healing properties when mixed with certain herbs. Wine, it seems, was more than just a drink. It was also seen as a medicine. This belief in wine's therapeutic value made it an indispensable part of the soldiers' daily routines, even though the ancient Greeks often mixed wine with water to make it less potent. The effects of alcohol still had their impact on the soldiers. The alcohol in the wine provided a temporary escape, helping soldiers to relax and temporarily forget the troubles of battle. Yet, this indulgence came with consequences. Too much wine could lead to drunkenness, affecting the soldiers' ability to make clear decisions or fight effectively. The delicate balance between drinking for relaxation and overindulgence was something the soldiers had to navigate on a daily basis. The role of wine in the Greek military culture is also worth noting for its ceremonial and spiritual significance. Wine was often poured as an offering to the gods, and it played a role in religious rituals that were performed before or after battles. The soldiers would offer their wine to the gods as a token of respect and gratitude, asking for divine favor and protection. This was not just about spiritual devotion, it was about reaffirming the soldiers' connection to a greater purpose and higher power. The wine became a symbol of hope and divine intervention, giving the soldiers a sense of peace and protection, even as they faced the harsh realities of war. Historians still debate the role of wine in the ancient Greek military diet. Was it primarily a practical means of hydration and nutrition? Or was it more of a cultural artifact, reinforcing social bonds and religious rituals? Some believe that wine's practical uses were secondary to its social and symbolic significance, while others argue that its role in nourishing the soldiers was of paramount importance. Regardless of the debate, one thing is clear: wine was deeply woven into the fabric of the ancient Greek soldier's life, both as a source of sustenance and as a means of spiritual and emotional support. Now that we've explored the role of wine and its intricate place in the Greek military diet, let's turn our attention to another surprising aspect of their food culture: the use of barley and bread. In the ancient world, barley was a staple food that served as both a nutrient-packed source of energy and a crucial component of the soldier's diet. It may sound simple, but for the ancient Greeks, barley was a symbol of sustenance, often serving as the foundation of a soldier's meals. Imagine this: it's the crack of dawn, and after a long march, a weary Greek soldier sits down by the campfire to eat a humble meal. Before him, a thick barley porridge, known as maza, is laid out. The porridge is a simple yet hearty dish, made by cooking barley flour with water, sometimes flavored with olive oil or honey. The simplicity of this meal belies its importance. It's filling, it's energizing, and it provides the sustenance needed for a soldier to continue fighting. Barley, being a hearty and nutrient-dense grain, was perfect for a soldier's high-energy lifestyle. It provided the necessary carbohydrates to keep the soldiers strong during long marches or battles. But the role of barley didn't end with the porridge. Soldiers would also consume barley bread, another staple of their diet. Unlike the fine, soft loaves enjoyed by the wealthy, the bread consumed by the soldiers was more coarse and dense, made from whole barley grain and often baked in basic ovens. The texture was rough, but it was practical, designed to fill and sustain rather than to light. What's particularly fascinating is the simplicity and practicality of this bread, which was so important to the soldiers' diets that they often carried loaves with them during campaigns. Bread became a symbol of survival, and whether it was consumed on the march or during short moments of rest, it was essential for keeping the soldiers nourished and energized. The meal was an anchor in their day, a form of comfort amidst the brutal realities of warfare. Historians argue whether the consumption of barley and its preparations, like maza, had additional health benefits beyond just providing energy. Some suggest that barley, with its high fiber content, played a role in maintaining digestive health for the soldiers during long and physically demanding campaigns. Others argue that the grain's true value lay in its availability and affordability, making it the perfect option for feeding large numbers of soldiers without breaking the kingdom's finances. Interestingly, barley's importance also extended beyond food. It was symbolic of a soldier's humble, grounded existence. It reflected their daily grind, much like their mundane, repetitive tasks in the army. The simplicity of the barley meal stood in stark contrast to the lavish feasts held by kings or other aristocrats. While these high-status individuals indulged in rich meats, exotic spices, and delicacies from across the empire, the soldiers subsisted on the basic, dependable nutrition of barley-based dishes. This created a social divide, but it also formed part of the soldiers' identity. Their diet of survival helped them bond as comrades, all part of a shared experience on the battlefield. Some scholars suggest that barley was the backbone of military success for the Greeks, as it was cheap, durable, and versatile. It could be easily stored, and it didn't spoil quickly, making it the ideal long-term food supply for the military. Whether it was ground into flour to make bread, cooked into porridge, or roasted and eaten whole, barley was always ready to serve. Despite its practicality, though, barley-based meals were not always beloved. For many soldiers, the coarse bread and porridge could be monotonous and unexciting after a long period of time. The Greek soldiers often craved the luxury of more varied meals, but barley was what sustained them through the hardships of war. Yet, no matter how humble, this grain kept the warriors fed, energized, and ready to fight another day. Historians still debate whether barley's role as a basic staple led to cultural symbolism in the context of war. Some argue that it was purely a nutritional necessity, while others suggest that the choice of barley represented the self-sufficiency and resilience of the soldiers. Either way, it's clear that barley, for all its simplicity, played a critical role in maintaining the Greek soldiers' strength on the battlefield and beyond.